we are live, correct?
Let me see. I
All right,
think
party
maybe.
people. All right, party people. So, last week we had the treat of all treats. We had this guy known as the Godless Cranium. And you thought it couldn't get any better than that. You thought I had the absolute penultimate atheist, the best atheist that anybody could ever get. Well, you're in for an even bigger treat because I have even better today. Whereas that guy's like kind of the what do we call him, Drew? Godless Cranium. You know him, right? He's the what of atheism.
Um,
He's the
he's the nice guy of anti-theism, I might say.
okay, the nice guy of anti-theism. Whereas you're just a nice guy. I don't even know if you're an anti-theist. We'll find that out in a few minutes. But today we have the genetically modified skeptic. So that guy was a leading atheist. This guy's even better. This guy's way better. Everything that you ever wanted to know about atheism, you learn from him. So forget about Godless Cranium. The Drew is here today. Drew, you want to introduce yourself? Can you hear the crowd? Go ahead, introduce yourself, Drew.
Yeah, so I am Drew from Genetically Modified Skeptic. I make atheist videos and videos about kind of skepticism in general, science advocacy, and I don't really get very political. Sometimes I talk about things just kind of in passing, and I also talk about alternative medicine because that played
Alternative
a
medicine
really
is like your new thing, right? You're doing that a
well. It's not
lot
my
lately.
new thing. I actually originally started as just an alternative medicine channel,
Oh,
and
really?
then yeah, I made an atheist video, and I was like, this did
This
pretty
works
well,
for
and I
me.
I
I'm
really
in.
wanted to
I'm
talk about
in.
this, so
I'm really
just
feeling
kept
it.
going with it.
So you made your atheist video and you found your true calling. You found your true voice. You're like, you know what? This is me. Okay, here's one thing that totally threw me. I watched your video today, actually. The, what was it, Muslims, right? Was today.
Yeah,
And then I watched your video on last week is coming out as an atheist. And here, this totally blew my mind. You've only been an atheist for 2 years.
yeah,
What the, when I heard that, that was like, my head literally exploded because I think of you. I met you on the Godless Cranium channel. The time we did that show with Shannon and GC was the first time I met you, right? I think
yeah,
I've only known you as like Mr. Atheist, like Mr. 50,000 subscribers, really up and coming channel. I assumed naturally that you'd been an atheist for 8 years at least. When I heard
yeah.
two, I couldn't even I couldn't wrap my brain around it. So let's start with that.
It's
Um,
funny because you know people say that, and it's odd to me because I think of myself as the only one out here and a new atheist, not in like the media term, but as in an atheist for not that much time. And for the
right.
majority of my life, I've been Christian, and being Christian is this massive part of everything
Who
around
you
me,
are.
all of my
You're
family, and
right.
who I am. Yeah.
Texas,
So,
right? You live in Texas?
right, I'm in Texas. I'm near Dallas.
Okay.
So yeah, it's odd to me when people think of me as, oh yeah, like he talks about atheism. Obviously, he's been an atheist for however long. No, I'm one of the reasons I'm genetically modified skeptic is because being a missionary runs in my family. I'm the first in 4 generations of men in my family not to be a missionary. So
Wow.
yeah,
Wow, that
everyone's
is
Christian around
weird.
me.
But from what you described on your channel, it seemed to go down relatively okay when you came out as an atheist. But that might not have been your immediate family. Was that, that was, who was that you described last week?
Yeah,
That
so
was
that
coming
was
out to,
mostly my close friends, and yeah, that did go much better than with immediate family. Um, I didn't I didn't get too much into detail, and some of the negatives were kind of blown over a little bit, just because I wanted to respect everybody's privacy, especially on my channel, you know. And
right.
mainly because like I want to respect their privacy and everything, but at the same time, it's not necessarily respecting their privacy to random people that don't know them and they'll never know and all that kind of thing. It's more like respecting their privacy to each other, because there's going to be, 20 people that watch that video that are my close friends and family, and they're going to be like, oh, I know who said that. Oh, I know who said that. That's
Oh,
what I was
wow.
really
Okay. I was
trying to
just
get
going to
cleared
ask
up
you
with them.
if your family watches your videos, and how
Yeah.
does that go
So,
down?
so, with my close friends, it's been different, and I got very, very similar responses to my close friends. They're all very similar in age. I only have one friend that's still in college. Everyone else has
And they're
graduated
all
or been
Christians, right? They're all, let's
right.
just clarify this. They're all committed Christians, not just
Oh,
kind of Sunday
yes.
Christians. They're
Yeah, definitely.
they're evangelists, and they're doing maybe even YouTube Christian channels. They're like
They
Craig Reeds,
well, they are. I mean, the first thing we have to
or
realize is they
wannabe
are
Craig Reeds.
different from you.
Wannabe Craig Reeds. Let
Right,
me
they want to be
clarify
Craig
that.
Reeds.
Wannabe. They aren't
Well,
Craig
one of the
Reeds. They aren't even
differences
close,
is,
but they want to be.
um, they're different from you in the way that you're not a young Earth creationist, as I understand,
No,
and
not at all.
all of my friends are all young Earth creationists, and they are complete 100% devoted biblical literalists. So
Oh,
that's a
wow.
huge part of
Oh,
it,
wow.
and I
Okay, so
mean,
there was what that means to me is that there was going to be a problem either way. Even if you didn't become, Mr. Devil, you were still going to be suspect, because you're not. There's no way that you could be that ever, right?
right. Yeah,
Correct.
no, it's so one way. I mean, the best way to say it is that it's incredibly devoted Southern Baptist is the type, even though most of my friends and most people that are Christian that are my age in this area, they're non-denominational or they're Baptist. But they're pretty much all non-denominational, but they're all in doctrine, they're Southern Baptist. Um,
Right. I got you. So
yeah, and that's
Southern
very
Baptist
common here.
Southern Baptist sort of implies pretty hardcore and conservative, right? Pretty
Yes, yes.
hardcore in terms of fundamentalists for the most part. I guess literalists. I didn't really realize that.
Yeah, they're Southern Baptists are typically creationists. I grew up independent fundamental Baptist, which is Southern Baptist, except women can't wear pants. And like at least in church, they couldn't wear pants. It used to be maybe 20 years ago, women couldn't wear pants at all, but the church slightly changed because they realized that no one would come visit the church if they were under the age of 50. Um,
Right? They'd be
but
like,
yeah,
"What?
so they changed that.
What's up with these
Uh,
ladies? What's going on?"
Also, no secular music, no dancing, no drinking, no smoking, and no gluttony. Whereas Southern Baptists, they're a little bit looser on all those things. Southern Baptists, can have a couple of beers as long as they don't ever get drunk. They can dance as long as it's not provocatively. They can listen to music as long as it's like God honoring. Like you could listen to the clean, like you all my Southern Baptist type friends listen to secular music, but not ones that have swear words in it. They're not out here like listening to Cardi B or Nicki Minaj or something. They're like listening
Right,
to
right, right,
like classic rock, or they're listening to, I don't know, Arcade Fire or something new that's not dirty.
right,
So
right.
yeah,
I'd imagine there's a struggle in there. I don't know how I'd navigate that as a like I'm an old man Christian, so it's a lot easier than I couldn't even imagine it as a trying to navigate as a 18-year-old Christian. I just don't even know how that would go down. Like where you would draw the line between this is acceptable and this is a bridge too far and this isn't. But
oh
from what
yeah,
it tells, so you were in a faith that was no holds barred, rigid, right? Orthodox,
oh
strict,
yeah, definitely, definitely. And
and you
people,
yourself were of the fold for a long time. Correct? You were committed. You were
oh
down with
man,
it.
I was more committed than most people. I mean, I remember being in college and reconnecting with one of my friends from high school after a couple years of not really talking, and she was Church of Christ, and so we had a lot in common, but they had some things that we didn't necessarily believe in. We weren't about baptism in the way that they were, even though we were Baptist, but we didn't think that it had any salvation to it. But then Yeah, I remember she went to college and she started drinking and she started dancing and she started listening to secular music more. Like
Right.
that wasn't, God honoring basically. And she also stopped being evangelical. She stopped witnessing to people. She stopped seeing that as a goal in her life. When people asked, she would be like, "Oh yeah, like I believe in God." She was still Christian, but that's what she would say because she wasn't the important part of that is she wasn't standing up for her faith in every moment that she possibly could. She wasn't like being a warrior for God in spiritual warfare like I was. But she realized she asked me about a couple of things in my college experience because mine was very different from hers. And she asked me why I was doing counseling psychology, and I talked to her about it. And I said the main reason is because I feel like God is calling me to do this. And she's like, "Well, I'm glad to hear that you're staying true to what we grew up believing and all that kind of thing," after having just told me that she tasted tequila for the first time a few weeks ago
Because
and that she kissed a gay guy and like and for me
so she
that was
so
leaving the
this is
fold
rocking your
completely.
world. This is like I can't even believe this sinful wanton this wanton harlot in her lifestyle.
I was never very judgmental because I hung out with I was a skater, so I hung out with a lot of people just at the skate park who would like smoke pot and drink and swear in front of me and all this kind of stuff. But I just never partook. I was very, very strong-willed, not in like a stubborn way, but I had a very strong force of will, and that's kind of me now. Um,
Okay, so wait,
so
so help me understand because there's the other thing I want to get to before I forget because I know I'll forget. You were in a punk band, you told me.
I
Two
was,
or three? How?
uh,
Where? When? How is
I
that?
was,
I don't understand the timeline of everything because
I was
you're
in.
still young.
Yeah, I've been one in high school, which my friends weren't allowed to come over to my house or ride my car anymore when people found that out. And I was in the punk band with people outside of the church, and my parents thought, like, my dad thought it was not okay at all, but my mom was like, "No, he needs to
It's
have an
cool.
outlet for this."
It's
And
cool. It's
I mean,
cool. Let it be.
my mom grew up listening and going to like Journey and like Kansas concerts and stuff, and she was Southern Baptist in the way that yeah, like they would drink and dance and like go to concerts and stuff and whatever. My dad was independent fundamental Baptist from like day one. So my dad made my mom a lot more conservative, but same theology except for a couple of legalistic things. But yeah, so I was in one in high school. That didn't last very long. It was like I don't know, 3 or 4 months, maybe 5 months.
And how did they view you? Were you like the square outsider, or were you like so square that it was cool, or like how did that
Uh,
work? How'd you negotiate that? Being like, were you? I don't know.
well,
What do you play? You
everyone
play
that I
rhythm guitar,
was
right?
everyone I was working with, they were all Christian too, so I wasn't like uncool or anything. If I wasn't
Okay.
Christian, that would have been bad. They were just not in the church, and one of them actually thought that being LGBT was okay, and I was like not cool with her about that. But I also wasn't like mean because I always thought being judgmental about it would just drive people away. So we
Okay, so
still got along,
but
good
you
friends.
thought internally, you thought to yourself, I can't believe she tolerates homosexuals. You're like, she shouldn't.
Not
That's
really
kind of where
that
you're at?
tolerates homosexuals. It's more like I can't believe that she doesn't think that the Bible is against that.
I gotcha. I
So it
gotcha.
wasn't really judging her, it was judging her theology, her ideas. I've always been able to separate people from their ideas. It's never been an issue for me. So that's how it was even growing up. And honestly, that probably worked in the favor of me getting out of fundamentalism at the very least. But yeah, so I played bass, and I was in maybe I've been in four. I've actually been in four bands. Yeah. So we had one. It's called the VX, and that was my very first band. And it was everything that just stuff that I wrote. I was the leader. I was the bassist. I was the vocalist, and I was
Awesome.
very very shy at
Wow,
that
that's
time.
actually very similar to me. That's weird. Go ahead.
Oh, really? That's cool. And then
Yes.
I was in a. This is probably the band that I have the most nostalgia for. I was in a uke punk band, a ukulele type band. It was kind of like folk
Oh,
punk slash ukulele, and it was called Uke Can Do It. And
cool.
I wrote an album. I wrote an EP for that right before college, and then I wrote an album for it in my first 2 semesters of college. I had serious insomnia, and I would just stay up and write songs. And then I was in a hardcore band at the same time as you can do it in college. First 2 semesters. It's called the Skid Marks, and
Skid marks.
I wrote everything for that. I was lead guitarist.
The
That was
skid
the
marks. The skid marks sounds more like a pop punk, like Blink. What's that band? Blink
Blink
something or other.
182. This
Is
was
it kind of like that vein? That's what it sounds like. Like,
oh man,
Wise
no, this
Alecky.
was straight up Black Flag early years.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
I
I was
can't. Oh my
rolling.
God! I can't even imagine this. And you sang?
No, I didn't sing for that one. I had a friend sing. I would play and then sing it to him, and then he would just sing it. But kind of a funny story. One time we were practicing, and we practiced in our Christian university's chapel. And one time
Oh, I'm sure they
one of the
love
tech
that. They're
guys,
like, what the, like, what the devil kids are back again. They're probably
well,
like prayed against you. Like,
chaplain there was really into old school metal. Like he was really into Sabbath and Ozzy and stuff. And so he thought it was really cool. And we didn't
okay.
have any swearing or anything in there. And so that's why, it was fine. So that was cool. But one time a sound guy came in when we were practicing, and my friend, he was this huge blonde guy, and he had just shaved his head. Actually, he had never shaved his head before. He had like a Justin Bieber cut before that, and he shaved his head. And it I think that the air conditioning went out when we were in there or something. And we're playing and everything. I have like my power stance going. Our bassist is jumping around. The drummer's going crazy. And we're just about to get up to this big bridge where there's supposed to be this giant scream. This sound guy runs in, and he sees this basically like skinhead looking dude taking off his shirt and like violently throwing it across the room and screaming into this microphone. Meanwhile, we're playing at like 110 decibels, and the dude just like covers his ears and ducks and like runs into the room and grabs a mic and runs away.
Wow.
So that was fun. And then I was in something that was called Sitzpinkler, and that was when I was in my last semester of college and my first kind of 6 months out of college. And that was a kind of 90s inspired early Weezer, like Blue Album, Pinkerton
Okay.
type.
Yes.
It kind of like a power pop type thing with a little bit of like noise elements thrown in there. That was definitely my most complex writing.
It sounds
And
interesting, actually.
yeah, it was
It
really
sounds like
fun.
it sounds cool. It sounds cool in terms of music. It sounds like on a certain page that would be relatively fruitful. When at one time, I'll tell you two brief stories. The first story is what's strange about this is when I first became a Christian, I was at like one meeting, and I remember this guy giving some sort of weird testimony in front of the group, and he was like, and then I clicked on this link on the internet. It was just evil from the pit of hell. It was Slayer, and I was like, "What? What?" I thought it was just so like, because there's a certain segment of Christians who get really tripped out by some of the stuff you're talking about, like tripped
Yeah.
out. But it doesn't seem like that necessarily played in. I guess kids are getting smarter about that in growing up as Christians, or what? How does that work? Are they just
Yeah,
not different
I
generation?
I think so. And a lot of that fear kind of comes from the satanic panic. And now when I was really young, that was in its tail end. And so I saw some of it. But I mean, you probably witnessed some of the satanic panic going on in the late 80s, early 90s
Yeah,
with
I witnessed it as one of the people who was being entertained by it. I told this story to Sirius the Skeptic. When I was at college, I only knew one evangelical when I was at college, and I got a real kick out of him. I'd be
mm,
drunk coming home from whatever, some party, and he'd be up at like 2 a.m, and I'd be like, "Hey, what's up, man?" And I'm sure he tried to evangelize me. And I went to this thing called Rock and Roll: A Search for God, and it was the Satanic Panic people. I don't know exactly who it was, but it was
yeah.
like they started with Led Zeppelin backwards, "My Sweet Satan," how you play it
Yep.
backwards, and then and then they did. I went for kicks. I went because to be entertained like everybody else at the college. I didn't go because I was, worried about the devil. I went And then the one thing I remember is Sid Vicious appears on the screen. Everyone's like, Sid, yeah. But that was my exposure to it. It was like something to be entertained by. I think I read The Late Great Planet Earth at the same time for the same reason. You know, oh, this is some kooky thing. Let's check this out. That type of thing. But go ahead.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, no, I mean, really the way to look at it is that meeting that you went to, that was every single Sunday, twice on Sundays, once on Wednesdays. And then I would also go other days of the week because my parents both volunteered and or worked at the church at some point. So yeah, that was my every week, every day for me saying that kind of
But
stuff. Now,
you at the same time, you were a very committed Christian though. So you were branching out into punk rock,
yeah.
but you were a very committed Christian. So
Yeah,
explain.
and one of the things that really drove me to punk rock, I
Are
think,
you
was
just a very complicated person? Is that part of the deal? You're very you like really good at like compartmentalizing different parts of your life
well,
and like really complex.
I've always been very analytical, you know,
Okay.
and so I never saw any theology that said that I couldn't listen to certain kinds of sounds. Certain messages I can understand that because I'm not supposed to think on what is not good. But these sounds are something that hype you up. It's fun. I'm not doing it in a place that's unsafe, and I'm not actually like putting any message out there that's not honoring to God or is not like at least neutral. So yeah, it was literally just sound to me, and I
Okay. So
enjoyed it.
you didn't even stuff that has like like some of this stuff has a there. I've explained this in videos. Like even Led Zeppelin, there's a real occult connotation. Like Jimmy Page was actually into the occult to one degree or another. How deep it went, I don't know. But like he bought the house where Aleister Crowley lived, and he was somewhat engaged. So it wasn't just like Christians making up out of thin air. But you didn't take it seriously in terms of that had really dark spiritual connotations on the music or for you or something like that. Am I right? Am I?
Yeah, yeah. There were certain people that I wouldn't listen to. Like I really, really liked Queen. I love
Okay.
Queen now. And honestly,
Yeah, Queen's cool.
I remember becoming an atheist and being like, "Oh my gosh, I can listen to Queen as much as I want." Because my dad always told me that that Queen was a satanic group and Freddie Mercury worshiped the devil and it turned him gay. And so I
Wow.
wouldn't listen to Queen even though I loved it. And so there were some things I didn't listen to because of what people were into. Yeah, actually, Alice Cooper is a Christian, but I never listened to Alice Cooper. I wouldn't listen to
Early Alice Cooper is rocking. It's really
yeah,
awesome. Stuff like I'm 18 is great.
right,
But
yeah,
yeah,
no,
he's a Christian now.
yeah,
But
and
he was a
so
big influence on the whole sound of stuff you're talking about. But go ahead.
yeah, no, it's I don't toot my own horn by saying like, oh, I'm so complicated, oh, I'm so analytical or something, but it's more complex than just that I bought everything, but it's also more complex than I like, oh, I've always been this critical thinker that saw through all the BS because I wasn't. I've always been a critical thinker, but that made me I knew apologetics and could talk about apologetics better than, and I'm not exaggerating, any person I knew that had not gone to seminary. Anyone, and that was up until
Yeah, I
college.
don't doubt that. I don't doubt, but you
So
believed it when you talked about it. It wasn't like you were just you were really when you started doing apologetics, you actually believe what you were saying, correct?
oh yeah, and I
You
I
weren't just.
used to I mean the arguments that I see on my videos, I'm like, yeah, I was arguing that stuff to my friends when
I
I
said
was
the
15
same
years
thing,
old.
right? Yeah, no, I can totally. I'm not a big fan of standard apologetics, as you probably gathered, in terms
Yeah.
of it's convincing. You know, most of it's preaching to the choir. Some of it I think is decent arguments, but I was really kind of disappointed. I didn't actually know who a lot of these people were until I started this,
Yeah.
which was about 2.5 years ago. Like I'd never heard of William Lane Craig before I was on Twitter. I've never, and the first time I heard of him on Twitter, I was like, "Who's that?" And I
See,
think I got made fun of.
I started reading him when I was 12 or 13.
Right.
So
But I'm not entirely convinced that I found anything all that convincing in his arsenal of. If Stephanie's there, I know Stephanie loves him. Sorry, Stephanie, don't mean to trash him. We're on the same team. But I'm trying to see who's in the live chat, but I can't actually do it because I'm connected on two things. Okay, so how did you? So you became an atheist 2 years. That's a very, very, very short time, and it doesn't seem like there was a. Do you mind me asking how old you are?
I'm 24.
Oh, so you're no wonder you're just a little scampy scamp, Drew. You're just a little kid. So, okay, so you're 22 years old. So you go to college. Was that part of the deconversion process? Because I know a lot of Christians have said that. And I'll tell you briefly the story of my mom. She was not an atheist, but like I was telling Cirrus, that's partially because there was no such thing as popular atheism to latch onto at the time. She
Yeah.
did something similar to what I hear from the fundamentalists and people like you. She goes to college and finds out, oh, wait a minute, people who don't believe in God are okay, or Muslims are okay. All the things that she had been taught all of a sudden start to go away, but she never went further with it because there wasn't necessarily an infrastructure, late 60s for her to go like, but go ahead. So you go to college. Was that part of it? This,
So
go ahead.
yeah, in a way. So the first thing that has to be understood is that my starting place at first, and this isn't the end all be all for me, but my starting place and the first thing that was kind of overthrown that was a significant step was my literalism, was my idea of biblical inerrancy. I mean, I knew that the Bible was not literally written by God. I knew how a lot of the books were compiled. I knew that not every author was known. I knew all of that kind of thing. But I did believe that all of the Bible was inspired, and like basically men of God were inspired by the Holy Spirit to write a very, very specific thing on the page, a word, I mean, word for word, like it had to be perfect. And there were no inconsistencies, there were no contradictions, there were no errors. And that in itself was evidence that the Bible was divine, and that was divine, and that there were no other divine books outside of the Bible, because all other holy books could be shown to have errors, and a divine book could not be shown to have errors. So I started
Right.
there, and I started with my kind of literal interpretation.
Right,
And
but
so
that's what I said. There's no way, even if let's just say, best case scenario, and you become some sort of God believing person again. You're like, that's not best case scenario. That's terrible. Um, There's no way you could ever become a Bible literalist. That's just not happening. That's never ever gonna. That can't reappear. Once that's been taken down, I doubt you could ever. Right.
right, and yeah, I mean, so there are other things that are based on my type of reasoning, my going through the logic, my metaphysics, all that kind of thing. There's that, and those are reasonable arguments. But biblical literalism comes down to straight up, just straight solid evidence. If there is no hard evidence for some of the things that are claimed, there's no reason to believe in them at all. And
Right, but all I'm saying is you could. There's no way on earth you could ever be a biblical literalist again. None.
I mean, I have trouble saying there's no way on earth, because I want to make sure that I maintain being open-minded, but I see that as almost an impossibility. It just,
Okay.
the only way I could go back to that would be to completely believe a conspiracy that all of the science that I now understand pretty deeply is all fake. And yeah, and so going to college, I'll start there. Going to college,
Yes. Okay.
I I mean, I have a minor in Bible. I did some theology classes and things like that. But that didn't really shake me. It was a Christian university, very Christian. It was non-denominational, but it was basically Southern Baptist. We had all those
Okay.
rules, no dancing actually too. So yeah. Um, I took an astronomy
No dance.
class in, yeah. We one
That's
time we
what
had a
everyone trips out of the dancing. What's going on? I guess it's too sexual. It's too sexual, Drew. Calm
Exactly.
down
We
with
had
the
a dance
dancing.
party one time in the dorm, like real low key, and it was really fun. It was great. But anyway, so I had an astronomy class, in my sophomore year,
Uh,
and it was like the end of my sophomore year, but almost my junior year, I think, like the summer between. And I took that with my now wife, and she was my girlfriend then. And basically, I learned that we can prove that the universe is not in fact 6,000 years old. And I mean, we can prove by the origins of light how long, at the bare minimum, our solar system has been around. And so I learned a lot about that. We had to actually write a
right,
paper
but
in our
that
class.
rocks you when you learn that. That is that rocking you when you get that knowledge, which is
Oh yeah.
basically kind of common knowledge. You're like, wait a minute, is
Oh,
this? I don't help me understand the process because I don't get it
that
because I
wasn't
have a
common
totally
knowledge at
different
all. Everyone that went
what
into that
from
class was like, the teacher doesn't believe in the literal, like the literal interpretation of Genesis. What's wrong with this guy? And then everybody at the end of the class was like, holy shit, I don't know. Well, I don't know what to believe anymore. And that's why they noticed that happening a lot in that class. Actually, a lot of biblical
get
literates would have their face
that
shaken
teacher out of
because of
here.
it. And the teacher was a Christian himself. He just wasn't a literalist. I mean, he was a very, very, like, extremely devoted, kind of traditional Methodist. But he wasn't a literalist in that way, not as far as Genesis goes. And so, anyway, they started assigning, and this was my final project. We had to write a paper about how to reconcile Christian faith with the things that you've learned, or how it has made your faith stronger to learn these things. And so I wrote mine about the origins of light, because to me that was one of the most definitive things, showing that no, the universe cannot be 6,000 years old, or you get into all kinds of craziness here. And this is how we can prove that the universe is at least this old. And the youngest that I could possibly even we can even demonstrate that the Earth, or that the solar system at least might be, is about 10,000 years, because that's about how long it takes for a photon to escape the center of the sun, created in the fusion reaction of the sun, and actually make it out to the surface of the sun. It takes at least a minimum of about 10,000 years. And because
Right.
it's so dense, photons bounce around. And so I wrote about that. I wrote about the Big Bang. I started believing in the Big Bang. And but basically I talked to the teacher, and I was like, I don't really know what the deal is. And I went through creationism with him, and he's like, yeah, that's not right either. That doesn't work out very well theologically, doesn't work out well with the original, like, language of the Bible, the ancient Hebrew there. And so anyway, I was like, I don't really know what to believe about this, but I bet it's more incredible than I could ever imagine, and God is even more miraculous to be able to do all of this. It just, maybe science has a little bit more credibility than I was taught. And he's like, I think that you've gone through the same thing that I went through, and you'll have a stronger faith because of it. And I was like, okay, thank you. And I just, like, I loved him. He was so great. I still think that he
This
was a
is the
great guy.
Methodist. This is the Methodist guy. Is who you're
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah.
Okay.
And he was
So
very devout too.
right, but his faith, he had reconciled his faith completely differently, so he didn't. Right, I got you. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so anyway, my wife went through the same thing, and we talked about that. But then about
She's a
two
Christian at
years,
this point. She's a
uh,
Christian,
yeah, at that point, yeah,
and now
um,
she's not.
agnostic.
Okay.
And so we went through that conversation, and we didn't really, like, go back to it. We didn't revisit it for like 2 years. And so we're talking last semester of senior year, which is winter of 2015. And I in that semester had taken some more classes. I started taking some master's level classes. One was in human sexuality, and so I was studying human sexuality and gender and everything from a scientific standpoint. And
Up,
I knew how to do
up.
research.
Sounds like trouble. Okay. Now
And so
it's all making
basically,
sense.
the thing that really made me start questioning again, after having had questions go dormant for like 2 years, was I realized, being gay is something that you're born with, and we can show that there's a genetic component. And if you try to change it, it only damages the person. If you try just not to act on it, it only damages the person. The way you can measure that people have the greatest happiness when they are LGBT, openly practicing safe sex with a basically with a monogamous partner, and their society around them is accepting of that. Basically, Northern Europe. And that's the place where people are happiest, both in and outside of the LGBT community when it comes to that issue specifically. And I was like, so I've been taught that being gay was something that, you're not born with. You just decide to be that way, or you get abused and you turn into that or something. And no, that scientifically that's not correct, and you can't change it either. And even if you say, oh, that's okay to it's okay to think that, or it's okay to have those feelings, but you can't act on it in a way that like Mormons talk about. And I thought that basically means that God created someone with this feeling and these feelings toward people and the sexual orientation, that it's actually demonstrably more harmful for them to hold it in than it is for them to just express it and practice safe sex and be monogamous and get married like everyone else. And
Right, but
yeah,
what's
and
that
so
got to do with what's that? Just because that's what went against what you were taught? I'm not sure how that. I guess I don't understand how deeply. Let me explain a little before you go on, because like with me, with like the inerrancy thing, I became a Christian. It never occurred to me until I got on Twitter that I was supposed to see the Bible as inerrant. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying it never occurred to me. Never, because I was raised almost completely secular.
yeah,
And, so the Bible was not, I was sort of Christian, like I was Roman Catholic and went to church on Christmas and Easter, but nobody ever expected me to adopt any of the tenets of Christianity. Matter of fact, people would gotten really surprised if I had. A lot of my friends don't know I'm Christian, friends from high school. They'll be really surprised. Really,
yeah,
really, really surprised. But so, okay, so does that make sense? Like, I understand why it makes sense to you that this would completely, the literalist, I get why that would completely, or at least undermine your faith,
yeah,
because that was one of the building blocks of it to a certain degree. You were being, you weren't just being told like Jesus loves you, God is real, give your life, do right in the sight of God, or things like that. You were also being taught the Bible is literally true, morning, noon, and night, correct?
yeah.
Or
And the thing
it was
is
being
that
reinforced.
I think a lot of people think that I went from being a biblical literalist to just like, well, if it's not literally true, then there's no other interpretation that's possible. Nothing like that could possibly exist. There's no other alternative theology. There's nothing more consistent than that. I give up. I'm an atheist. And it didn't go that way. It was I
Right,
say
but your trajectory to atheism seems a lot quicker than most of the. That's the only reason why it threw me, because 2 years is pretty quick. Even Godless Cranium, and that's like that guy's like so atheist, it's ridiculous. He didn't believe anything. He's like, it took him six or something. And then I
yeah,
hear with other people something that I think it was Apologia talks about a struggle, a long struggle of
yeah.
trying to believe, and I've heard that more frequently. 2 years seems very, very, very quick. So go ahead.
Yeah, so this was
How so quick? That's what I'm trying to get
I
it get at.
I think it was late summer that I took that class, and I've had questions come up in my mind for the first time since that 2 years ago when I had questions come up about literalism, and so that got me really thinking about literalism. And all of that to say is those things open the door for me to be like, I need to ask questions and find what the true interpretation of Christianity is. I need to figure out, if Christianity is true, all of this kind of stuff. So
Right.
that's really more, those weren't things like, oh, you know what, those things are true. Like being gay is like natural, therefore there's no God. It wasn't like that. And it was just that, well, this kind of throws a wrench in the works for literalism. And so I need to figure out whether or not literalism actually is the best way to go about things, or maybe there's some way that literalism is actually true. And so it got me thinking a little bit about morality. It got me thinking a lot about historicity, and a lot of it had to do with my phone thinks that I said "Hey Siri" when I said historicity. um, but yeah, a lot of it got me thinking about kind of the supernatural and how could we reliably come to have an experience with or understand the supernatural?
So
How could
you
we
did
show
you
that
ever
it
have
exists?
ever have an experience when you were growing up or as a Christian that you would have described as supernatural, or you would have said, I really felt God was with me there or there? Because I had
Oh yeah.
experience like that before I became a Christian. And those were a lot of, I felt like God was actually nudging me for years, a decade at least, where I wasn't an atheist. But I would have, if you asked me, I would have said I was agnostic. I
Yeah.
think I talked about this a little when we had our debate. But so you did have experiences that you thought at the time were God, yes, or go
Oh
ahead.
yeah,
Like
for
what?
sure. Um, one of them that's striking, and maybe less relatable, is, I mean, because I don't know if most people have had this unless you're like Pentecostal or something, but I thought that I had cast out a demon at one point actually. Um, yeah, there was a kid at my church at one point, and it's kind of a long story having to do with the kid kind of stalking me a little bit, and then I actually thought that at some point I got up kind of close to them and ended up casting the demon out of them because I thought that I could feel the spiritual presence of something glaring through their eyes at me, and I thought that like I had basically heard God's voice telling me that they needed to be cast out, and
Wow, that's
yeah.
pretty intense. How do you view that now? How old were you?
Man, how old was I? I think that I was actually just in junior high. And so that was kind of, as I got older, I started to question that a little bit. And that's something that I definitely felt like I had experienced until I was probably about 17 or 18. Um, One of the things was they wouldn't enter the church. And I thought that that was like a big deal. Maybe they had like some kind of presence or something.
The
And
person who you cast the demon out of wouldn't go in the church,
right.
or
And
the
it was a
demons.
it was a kid. I mean, my main issue is with that is I had no evidence other than like this feeling. It was just a feeling in my brain that this person might have had a demon in them. I had absolutely no evidence whatsoever that it was anything but something mundane, like they were having a bad day, or this kid was really creepy, or this kid maybe was mentally ill, or maybe that kid could have had autism and was like just staring daggers at me or something like that. And I was going up to them and like placing my hand on them and like praying, and that was
Oh,
weird.
you actually went up to them and put your hand on them and said, "In Jesus' name, come out," or something like that. I bind
Uh,
you in
I,
Jesus' name.
I touched them, but didn't say anything audibly.
Okay,
So because
gotcha.
there were other people kind of around, and I didn't want to make this big scene, because I
But at
knew
the time,
basically
you
that,
felt like you performed a miracle of sorts. You exorcised somebody. You
yeah, and
exercised your authority over the powers of darkness. You took your
the funny
authority in
thing was
Jesus'
is
name.
that in my life and the amount of experiences that I felt like I had, that was kind of mundane. I bring that up because from an outsider's perspective, and I'm usually talking to people on the outside, that's really weird, right? Like they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is this huge, insane experience." Like that was not that much. That wasn't a big deal for me. I didn't even tell my wife about that until I was like, oh, I don't know, I was probably like agnostic at that point, and she thought that was strange. And
Right?
because it
No,
just wasn't even
that's very
remarkable.
mundane. That's very run of the mill for me. I totally understand that. Um,
Yeah, and so the real experiences were just constantly all the time in certain actions, in worship, in prayer, in devotion, in evangelizing. I felt the spirit all the time. And I mean, like again, it was just mundane. I mean, people say, "Oh yeah, I just one time I was praying and I really felt this like experience like of of peace, of connectedness, of self-transcendence, like I was part of something larger and there's something there with me. The words were just flowing and I was talking to someone, I just knew someone was there with me, something like that." That was like every week for me. I don't understand when people say they've had one of those experiences. Even people who weren't really necessarily that religious, I just don't get how you can go through life without having experienced that a few times. Because for me, that was like all the time.
right, but
And
okay. For example, there's another guy who's an atheist who never had an experience like that. Never, never.
yeah,
He went through this whole crisis where he was trying to hear from God, and he did this whole elaborate ritual thing, but he never had that experience that you're talking about. Because yes,
Yeah.
I don't quite understand how you went from those experiences to atheist, but I totally understand those experiences 100%. How you
Yeah.
described it is the first time I've heard a former Christian describe something relatively close to, or in somewhere within the ballpark of my own experience. Most of the stuff they're talking about, I'm like, yeah, that's not like me at all. But yours is
Yeah.
much more similar to how I would describe it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and
How?
I'm glad that we have that common ground because I do talk to people on either side, some Christians and some people that have never been religious or people who are ex-Christians or whatever that say they never had any kind of experience with it, and that's just kind of strange to me. So I'm glad we have that in common. My wife has felt those same things. We both have, and we shared those experiences with each other. And when we were first dating, it's like a very bonding, uh, moment for us when we would share that stuff. And so, a large part of it had to do with, I started thinking about supernatural experience and how we could potentially reliably measure the supernatural. And I studied uh, research methods, statistics and research methods for a year in
Mhm.
psychology. Plus, I'd studied social psychology, physiological psychology, neurology, all that kind of stuff. And I realized, and some of the stuff was in parts of the books that they wouldn't teach us at the school because it was sacrilegious. Um, there were certain parts of books that not directly but somewhat indirectly referred to religious experiences and what the psychology is behind that, what is happening in your brain chemically when that's going on and stuff like that.
Wait,
And
what are
so
you
I
talking? Are you talking in psychology books or what? I'm
Yeah, in
not. You
psychology books
lost me.
in the curriculum that I learned in my psychology because I have a major in psychology, I have a degree in
Oh, I
that,
gotcha.
and
Okay.
so I would go back and read parts that were relevant to experience and people that like experiences that people call supernatural, and the psychological phenomenology of religious phenomenology. And
Did you read William James, The Variety of William's Religious Experience?
um that sounds really
Have you read that?
familiar. I don't think I've read that.
And what about The Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell?
I have read that, although that was quite a while ago.
Okay, just curious. Because when I
Yeah.
was an agnostic, okay, some of the things you're describing, I had. I'm going to get better at making videos about this, but I tried to delineate. Um, I'll just tell you briefly, then I'll let you talk again. For example, when I was very young, I took LSD uh, when I was in high school a couple times. One time we were out in a field, and I would have described that as my first spiritual experience. So when Jordan Peterson was talking about, so you even did a video on this, psilocybin as a spiritual experience. I
Yeah.
had that, but I wouldn't describe that as a spiritual experience looking back now. But I had other experiences prior to me becoming a Christian that I would have described as God nudging me, God going, psst, psst. And they were very powerful at the time.
Yeah.
Now, um, so I totally understand what you're talking about, but at the same time, I'm an agnostic and I'm having those type of experiences, and I'm reading books like William James, The Variety of Religious Experience, and The Power of Myth, and they're kind of speaking to me on a level of like, okay, there's something to this. But go ahead. Now go ahead. Now your turn.
Yeah. So for me, it was learning about what's going on in the brain and in society and culture in a lot of different ways. What was going on when we have supernatural experiences like that? I started studying about what happens when people in other religions have supernatural experiences, when people who have never heard of any kind of Abrahamic or just mainstream religions, people in very rural parts of the world, what happens when they have supernatural experiences and supernatural experiences from history, supernatural experiences when they're drug induced versus when they're induced electrically or things like that. And eventually, all that to say, I came to realize that there was very little or just about nothing there that I could grasp onto and say, this is uniquely supernatural. This cannot be explained in some way scientifically. And then I went even beyond that and realized, it doesn't even matter if I could explain this supernaturally. It's philosophically. can we reliably determine that this was supernatural rather than natural? Can we basically ignore Occam's razor and say that this was something beyond something that we could observe within the natural realm? And can we verify that? Or could it all come down to something happening more naturally? You know, can we actually get to that conclusion reasonably without making any, like, too many assumptions? And I came to the
Right.
conclusions, no, I didn't think that we could actually verify that supernatural experiences were anything more than natural. And it's not confirming that all supernatural experiences are natural. It's just that we can't confirm that supernatural experiences, quote unquote, actually are
Right, but
supernatural.
okay, but let me ask you a weird question. Why would you care? Like, so what?
Well,
Like
because
you're telling me that like that's, and I'm sure if there are atheists in the chat group, I'm sure there's a few. They're like, yes, I get that completely. I'm listening to that. Like, yeah, of course there would be some sort of natural explanation. That doesn't necessarily rule out that there was that I don't necessarily rule out that you were having legitimate supernatural experiences because it can also be explained through the natural. Is that
yeah,
how you perceived it? Is that what you're saying? I don't know.
the
You tell
the
me.
way that I thought about it was, well, I've had all of these experiences. Everyone I know, or not everyone, but a lot of people that I know have had these supernatural experiences. I used to think that I could confirm through personal experience what was true and like what was true about the supernatural. And now I don't think that I can actually confirm anything through supernatural experience, through personal experience. A lot of that also had to do with the fact that I knew a lot of people that had started making claims about essential oils and saying that that essential oils worked, and the way that they evidenced that was their personal experience. The issue was is that they couldn't rule out the placebo effect. They couldn't rule out effects of other medications, of diet, of exercise,
Okay,
of
okay,
lifestyle
I
choice.
think I get you. So, how do you view those experiences from today? You view them as they weren't legitimately spiritual experiences. You were having some sort of emotional placebo effect or caught up in the emotion of your. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I could say that, but it's not necessarily even useful to say that now. It's that I can't confirm that those were supernatural. Those were experiences. I can describe what happened. I think those things actually happened. Like, I did have some kind of, you know, kind of self-transcending type experience, but I can't confirm that that was supernatural. I can't confirm that that had anything to do with anything other than, me. And there are valid observable mechanisms behind all of those things happening. So those are the most likely explanation, but I don't even have to conclude that those are the explanation. I just can't conclude. I can't reasonably, reliably conclude that those were supernatural. So my position is more like, I can't conclude that those were supernatural. I can't consider those as actual evidence. And just like I wouldn't consider a Muslim's experience of being on their prayer rug and being bathed in a green light, which is actually very common in Islam because there's a sacred color of green in Islam. So a lot of Muslims report seeing a green hue or shape or something or light when they have supernatural experiences. So, and there are different ones in
Really? I
Hinduism,
didn't know
things like
that.
that. Yeah, that was actually something I thought was
Why
really
is
interesting.
that's very why is green sacred in Islam? Any idea? I didn't even
Um,
know that. I don't know very much about Islam. That's my weakest in terms of ignorance.
okay,
I'm learning a little bit here and there.
Islam's really, really interesting, and especially if you have a strong understanding of the historicity of the Bible and just the compilation of the Bible and of Judaism of the area, which I have since I was a little kid. Islam is very interesting, and there's certain things that it's it's straight up plagiarism. And so it's kind of funny. And then there are
Right.
some things that are kind of new ideas that they saw as kind of improvements on Christianity at the time. But so it's interesting. But no, I'm not sure theologically why it's a sacred color. I think psychologically they probably valued it as a sacred color because, I mean, where did Islam come from? It came from the desert of Arabia, and green was salvation. Green was life because that represented calm.
Oh, that's a really good guess. I
In
got you. Yeah,
in a
because if you
world,
see green, then it's not dry. There's
right?
something to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so that's why
that's
I would
actually
guess.
that's probably correct.
I mean,
Now,
I'm
what
not
about
sure, but maybe.
Now, what about when you went to Singapore? You had a video on that, didn't you?
Yeah,
Since
yeah,
we're
I have a
starting to
video on it.
move into comparative religion a little, um, I watched that video. I thought that video was really interesting. You went with your family?
Yeah, I went with my in-laws and my wife. And my in-laws actually didn't know that I was making a video for anything but just me because I've always been into video. I had a YouTube channel for like my skating when I was like 15,
I
and
got it.
I've
Okay,
always known
now
how
it's
to edit
starting to make
video.
more sense. Okay,
So
now it's starting to make more sense.
I was able to low key just like, hey, I have this new camera now because I got a new job and it helped me afford it. I wasn't actually making any more than my last job, but I got a new job like doing social media, which that was true. I was doing social media for like a baby technology company. And yeah, so I was just like, I'm just taking pictures and I wanted to film and I'm really into this. And they were like, okay, whatever. And
Film. I want to film how ignorant you guys are. Yeah, that's fine. That's cool. Tell
so
what backwater rubes you are.
I filmed all that
Okay, go
stuff, and
ahead.
of course, I took pictures of the vacation. I took pictures of them, and they were all cool with it. I guess they probably seen that video now and realize, oh, hey, Drew was making a video for his channel while we were in Singapore together. So I hope that they don't feel like that was too much of a betrayal. But I was like,
How
at
did
that
they?
time,
This is your mother and your father that you went with, correct? And they're
no,
both. They're really committed Christians still, correct?
these are my in-laws, but yes,
Oh, okay. And how are they responding to Singapore? I'm partially curious about that too. Were they
they
like,
they
oh,
they've been
it's
there a bunch of
strongholds
times.
of? Were they praying against like Buddhist temples and stuff? Were they like,
No, they didn't really want to go to the Buddhist temple. They live in Asia, so they know all that stuff. I mean,
oh, they're
they live
missionaries.
surrounded. Yeah. Um, so they live surrounded by primarily Muslims. But yeah, they live in Asia and they vacation in Singapore a bunch of times, so it wasn't a big deal.
Oh, okay,
And
okay, I
but
got you.
it was really funny. There were these things called singing bowls that we went to, like Little China, and
Uh
that
huh.
was in Singapore, and they had these singing bowls, Tibetan singing bowls there, and you're supposed to basically place them on a person's back, and then you tap the side, and it makes this kind of resonant tone, and then you rub around the edges of it to keep that tone resonating, and it's supposed to basically make there be good vibes, literal vibes in the room that promote healing. And so it's a part of a massage in ancient like Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. And so we were looking at this in this gift shop, and the store owner, comes up and places it in my father-in-law's hand and starts kind of like doing the singing bowl thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought it was really cool, and he's like, oh wow, this feels so like weird on my hand. It's like kind of tingly, and it's like it's nice, it's like relaxing. And then she starts explaining how it works and stuff, but then she starts mentioning chakras, and like this balances your chakras, it
Right.
will awaken your chakra in your
And
hand and all
the
that kind of
goddess
stuff.
Shiva enters you while you're doing it. She's like, wait.
And so we're all just kind of looking at each other like, uh-huh. But it wasn't like this big deal. My parents would have been very, very weirded out by that and very uncomfortable in certain ways. But um not my in-laws. They'd seen it before. They just kind of like laugh it off a little bit.
Right, I got you.
They
Well, I
pretty
mean,
much
if they're
actually act the same
missionaries,
way toward it that I do. I'm just like, that's kind of BS, but whatever.
right? Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is like how you get wired up to perceive these things is. I guess it's a lot of training and then temperament. Some people are more, yeah, whatever. If I can't perceive it as dangerous in the moment, like I tend to be more like that, just
Yeah.
from how I was raised.
Yeah.
My wife tends to be a lot more. How would you say it? She was Christian. She's part of why I became a Christian. But when I met her, she was a lapsed Christian. But when
Mm.
her version of being raised Christian, and she'll say she was raised as a fundamentalist Christian, but it's total nonsense. You would never say that if you knew how she was raised. I mean, she went to normal movies and she dated people and she went to parties and she was the only Christian in the town that she grew up in. So she
Yeah.
was technically a Christian, but it wasn't even close to what you're talking about. Totally different experience.
Yeah.
We both grew up in Westchester, different planet. different planet
Yeah.
from where you grew up. It's not Bible Belt at all. I didn't know a single. I actually don't think I knew a Republican for a long time until I was in college. Till my wife.
Oh man.
You know, I mean, it's a very secular left wing suburb of New York City. So,
Yeah.
but so it's a
Man.
totally different. It's a totally different. What are you saying, man?
Well, the only way that I knew a non-Christian or a liberal was by people in my church talking about how terrible or horrible they were.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I'm saying. It's a totally different planet of experience. The only way I heard of a conservative or a Christian was sort of the same idea. The one thing it's not cool to be where I grew up was a Christian. Like
mm,
nobody would care if I became a Jehovah's Witness. They would. I have a friend who became a Jehovah's Witness who was like a heroin guy and supposedly became a Jehovah's Witness, and no one really cares. But if you said I became a Christian, that would weird everybody out. I can't believe that person became a Christian
yeah.
partially because of how poorly the church has propagandized, interacted with the culture at large, the mainstream culture to a
Yeah.
degree, you know. But were you politically, did politics play into your walk away from Christianity at all? Because with your friend, who's your friend? Dan. Is that his name?
Yeah.
By the way, try and get him to come on. Will you think he'll come on my channel?
Oh, I think that he would.
Okay, cool. Um, I got the sense that politics started with him, started the process. Like he was looking for a way to reconcile, and he was kind of checking out these more like liberal Christians, these more like watered down Christians, trying to stay in the faith while still not accepting some of the politics. But it doesn't sound like it with you. You tell me.
Yeah, for me, politics had nothing to do with it at all.
Doesn't
Um,
sound like it.
I didn't even get interested in politics until after I deconverted because it was just such a given that you were Republican. I mean, you were like Reagan. I mean, Reagan party type, just like moral majority. The party, the what is it like the party of morality or something like that? There's an
The
old like
moral
Reagan
majority.
type, yeah, moral majority.
The moral majority was that was the Jerry Falwell group.
Mm, right,
That's
right,
how.
right.
Yeah, most of the people I meet now as Christians, most of the Christians I meet, even out here in California, like we go out to dinner with this group of Christians. They're almost all routinely Republican. They're almost all like that.
Yeah,
Doesn't necessarily have to be if you're talking about the Bible, but that's how the culture is. There's a whole story about that where Jimmy Carter he actually had huge evangelical support when he first was running for president because he's a born again Christian. And then, there was a whole political peeling off where they all started becoming the whole movement. A lot of it was the Southern Baptists, actually. But
yeah.
okay, so politics had nothing to do with it for you. I kind of get that.
Yeah,
But
no,
okay, keep going.
I didn't think it should have, because for me, and to also answer the question earlier, you're saying like, why do you care about supernatural experiences, being thought about in a different way? It's just I was raised to think, and I still think now. I think I was taught this for very good reason. Just the conclusions I don't agree with now. Is that the question of God's existence or just kind of a grand cosmology, the answer to the
Right.
questions that brings up, those are the most important questions that you can ask yourself in a lot of ways. I mean, that was one of the most important questions of my entire life. I mean, really,
Yeah,
whether or not God
absolutely.
existed
Absolutely.
was tied to. I don't understand when atheists are like, "Oh, who cares?" Whatever. Like, they're like apatheists. They don't believe in God because they don't give a shit about the questions. I'm like, are you serious? That's not an important question to you. That's huge. And
Well, I get that. To tell you the truth, I get that more than I get atheists. That's the
mm,
one part of like I get atheists. I get along with atheists pretty well. I thought I was going to, but the one part of atheists that were wired differently is when I was in my 20s and I was agnostic. I didn't necessarily care until I started caring. When I was in high school, I could have cared less. I mean, I care
Yeah.
about, getting girls and going to parties, period. And music and movies. That's it. Honestly, that's about it.
Yep.
God, that's why I wasn't interested in high school. Somewhere in my 20s, I started caring a lot. And then I'd agree with you with what you just said. It started
Yeah.
becoming extraordinarily important to me prior to me becoming a Christian. But I totally get most atheists aren't like that. Most atheists are not agnostics like, I'm just here having fun and who cares? I'll find out when I die. That's how a lot of people, just general people are.
Yeah.
But atheists, no. They got a dog in the fight for sure, usually. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And
Yeah.
it's all consuming in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, it can be, and especially when you're raised around a more fundamentalist crowd, and it's really because the answer of whether or not there is a God and what is his nature, that applies to a lot of practical questions. How do you live the most happy and fulfilled life? How do you decipher right from wrong? How do you do this and that? All of these things that will practically, they have practical implications for your life, are all informed a little bit by whether or not a God exists, or if you can actually show it to exist, and what the nature of that God might be. And so I thought that from the very beginning. I thought that when I was 5 years old, and I still think that now, and I think that I have very good reasons for thinking that is true. And so that's why I started caring about that, because I was thinking, what if I can't actually experience God? What if I can't actually demonstrate that those are experiences with God? So that's why that was all important to me. And it's
Right, but
important.
you're talking about experience that you actually had.
Yeah.
That's a I mean, don't you in order to even be asking that question, you're already doubting something about the correct. You're already on a different. That's the only thing you've said to me. You and I understand. I understand a lot about you, or I get you a lot. It's the only thing about you I don't get. Because I'm just. It wouldn't even occur to me to think that way. An
To think.
experience that I have to think, how can I justify the experience that I'm not explaining this very well. Do you know what I mean?
I think I understand what you
It's
mean.
okay.
So one of the things that got me thinking about that part of it too was that, like I said, I knew a bunch of people who started talking about essential oils and using them as medicine and replacing medicine with them, and saying that they could do all of these things that were pretty crazy things, like curing cancer and all that kind of stuff. And so I started asking the people that did that, how do we know that this cures cancer? How do we know that this actually does help you in this way? And
Right.
at first they would always say, oh, well, there's evidence of it, and they would explain it, and I would find out, no, that was actually faked, or that's not peer reviewed scientific evidence, or that's completely irrelevant. I was completely scientifically literate at that time, and so I could say, I could show, no, this is not a peer reviewed paper, this is an article on a freaking website. What are you talking about? It's crazy.
Right.
And this is not from a professional. There's no real testing here. You can't even prove this ever happened. And
Right.
so anyway, so yeah, all of that. And so eventually people would always bring their arguments back to, well, even if there was no like written evidence out there, which there's not, uh, they would say, well, I know that this works. I know that this cured my, shingles, because I had a personal experience with it. I know that lavender oil can heal a burn because I use lavender oil and my burn healed. And so
Right.
I
But I
know
I I
that.
tend to okay. I think I understand where you're going with this. So I think, but keep going. I think I get
Yeah,
it now.
so I realize, I can't isolate. You can't isolate the personal experience. It hasn't been tested in a way that's reliable. Maybe that lavender oil wasn't actually the biggest factor. Maybe it was the placebo effect that helped your burn heal faster. Maybe you
So you're
changed
saying
your
it's
diet, or
possible that they are diluting themselves in their knowledge of what actually worked for them. They are deceiving themselves. They're experiencing something that they didn't actually experience. It was a placebo, and you know, so they felt better the next morning, but it's not something that legitimately occurred. That's what
well,
that's what
I-
you're saying.
I'm saying that there's no reliable way to possibly determine that their personal experience with the oils, and that it was like, is actually the way that they described, because there were no controls on the testing. So if you think
Right.
about it as a test, if that was a scientific experiment, the peer review board would all say, well, you didn't control against placebo. You didn't control against dietary changes, exercise changes, psychological changes. You didn't control any of that. So you can't
Right.
actually reliably say that it was the lavender oil that did that. And so I just applied the same reasoning basically to,
To
what
yourself.
to
That's where it
myself
gets a
with
little.
all of my experiences that I had that I had deemed supernatural. How can I reliably determine that this was the supernatural that did this and not something else? And I just couldn't. So that was the issue.
Right, but why did you determine it so completely in the other direction? You're an atheist, right? I mean, you're an
Yeah.
atheist. You're not a, I don't know. These cool things happen to me, but I wouldn't necessarily say that you're an atheist, which means you pretty much case closed. Those weren't God, correct? Or
Well,
not? I don't, you tell
see,
me.
my
I don't want to put
position
words.
is that I don't think that in those cases and with the evidence that we have, it is possibly knowable. I don't think that you can determine really whether or not it was a god. But at this point, I think that there's absolutely zero evidence to actually inform a positive justification for that. I don't think that there are actual positive reasons to believe it. I think the default position is, well, I can't actually assert that there's something there until it can be evidenced. So my default conclusion is, well, I mean, the very first way I ever described it for myself was the most reasonable way to live is to live as if there is no God. Live as if there is no God that exists, because like we have the same evidence as any other being or any other character that you could possibly invent in your head. We have the same amount of evidence for that, and we don't act like those things exist because we don't have any good reason to. So that's why I'm an agnostic atheist. The agnostic part is very important. I think that Gnostic atheism is pretty backward and stupid. And there are people in the atheist community that, like, people that watch my videos and they talk about that, and I think that they're on about something ridiculous.
What is that exactly? That
That
they know there's no God?
that
Is that
they
was
know
that what that means?
100% sure that there's no God. I think that that is not philosophically justifiable.
Right. No,
So
there's no way that's filled. But okay, so I kind of get it. I kind of get it. But so from a subjective point of view, though, not necessarily an objective point of view, you don't think that those experiences, looking back on those experiences now, you obviously don't think that that was God in any way, shape, or form,
no,
subjectively speaking.
no, I don't have a
So
good
what
reason to
what
think
do
that
you
those could be God.
so what do you think? What do you think happened?
Well, the thing is that I can't assert a knowledge about it. I can maybe talk about probability or something like that. I think it's more probable that it was something natural. Like, I mean, we can actually simulate supernatural experiences in the brain by chemically or electrically stimulating certain parts of the brain, and things like that happen all the time across several different religions that all contradict each other. There's something most likely, I think, within the human mind. I mean, it's honestly, this is something that you can kind of prove, but I think that with those experiences, it's most likely that natural mechanisms basically happen within my brain and happen within a lot of people's brains to allow me to have this kind of chemical cascade in my brain that simulated something that made me feel self-transcendent or happy or joyful or content or anything like that. All of those things are also tied to triggers, and they were tied to things that I did for worship, for prayer, for believing that everything was perfect, everything was going to work out perfectly for me, all of that kind of stuff. There were triggers there, and there was a lot of ritual around it, and so it was
Right.
easy
I'll just
for.
tell you why this is so interesting, because most of the atheists that I've talked to who were former Christians, they don't describe experiences like what you were having. They describe a complete lack of experiences like you were having.
Yeah,
So
and that
that's
is.
very different from most people. Most of the people who I've talked to who are now atheists who were Christians, they'll insist that they were, practicing Christians, yada yada yada. But they don't. They did not have experiences like the ones you were describing. I doubt they would have walked away if they had.
And here's the thing: is the as much as I'm saying that a personal experience of the supernatural is not reliable in determining whether or not the supernatural exists. Just as much as that, I am also saying that not having an experience with the supernatural is an unreliable way of determining whether or not it exists. That
Right, but
it
that
goes
makes a
both
lot of
ways.
sense to me. If someone were raised Christian, but they had no, they couldn't look back and say, you know, I really felt God in this meeting and I really felt God in that meeting. It makes perfect sense to me that they, if they come up blank, that they'd walk away eventually. You know, it makes a
Right,
lot of sense.
right, and it's
I'm
and
not
it's
saying they're
because
right. I'm just saying I get it. You know, with
yeah,
you,
no,
it's a little. That's why I'm a little bit like, huh? Well,
it's
you were. I don't completely get it. That's why. Go ahead.
it's intuitive. You know, I think that the way that we have determined whether or not something was going on is that we had a personal experience that was not controlled, and we just posited a theory behind it, and we just called it good. That was before the advent of science, which is the vast majority of all of human existence. That is how most people determine things, is through their personal experience. And so I think it makes perfect sense. It's intuitive that people do that, but I do think that actually arriving at definitive conclusions through those things is completely logically fallacious. And so that's why I don't engage in that. I don't tell people, hey, essential oils don't work because I've never had an experience with them where I felt like they did something. That's irrelevant. It's not relevant at all. And so I don't tell people that God doesn't exist, or we can't show that God doesn't exist, or we can't show that God does exist because I've never had a supernatural experience or something, because that's irrelevant to the actual argument. People have had contradicting experiences. Like, people have not experienced God, and some people feel like they have experienced God. And so, like, who's right? If we take his personal experience into account and say this is a reliable way of determining what's true, we have contradictory experiences. That means so many things are true and they all contradict each other. So I can't buy into that game.
Right. Yeah, I get you. It's just. It's just. Okay. Yeah. No, I definitely hear what you're saying. It's just, you know, it's different. A lot of other people, if they had experiences that they could look back to in their Christian life, they would have stayed. They would not have
Yeah,
become atheists.
right. And yeah,
And
no,
they
I
haven't had.
totally agree.
So
And so
it's
you might have
go ahead.
noticed in my videos that a lot of people in atheist videos, it's almost like they're just talking to a religious audience, right? And I can't delude myself into thinking that the majority of my audience is religious. They're not. They're people who want to hear things that they like to hear, that they agree with, right? And
Right.
so
Of course.
what I do with my channel to make it to where it's in any way constructive is I have things in there that are talking about supernatural things, and debunking, just, or not even supernatural stuff, but just debunking things that are logically fallacious, but then also putting something in there and being like, hey, I know that you already don't believe that there is a God, but your reasons for that suck. And here are some better reasons for that.
Okay,
So,
so this takes us to street epistemology. Go finish. Let's finish what you're saying, and then
yeah.
let's go to that because that's
Yeah, no, I don't want people to come to the right conclusion for the wrong reasons. For me, it's all about having the right reasons. And so in my videos, I criticize people that watch that might be, as far as conclusions go, they might be on my side. But if their reasons aren't on the side of reliability, of reasonability, which I try to be on, then they're not on my side ultimately. And I'm not for that kind of thinking. So I draw people in with one type of content, and then I can almost think of it as I kind of sucker punch people with something else that they weren't quite expecting. It's My content is kind of a Trojan horse, and it's always meant to be that. I've always meant for it to be that way. And so I want atheists to watch my videos, or skeptics to watch my videos, and learn something that they have been too closed-minded to actually learn from someone uh, who is not on their side. So I get them on my side, and then they're like, hey, I think I'll listen to this. Oh, I'm wrong. Okay, well, someone on my side told me I'm wrong, so I guess I'll listen to them. That's kind of
okay.
the
So
point.
what are the things that you want them to take away from your vid? What are you Trojaning them horse into? You're
The
Trojaning horsing them. You're Trojaning horsing them into what exactly?
well,
Get them to
a couple of the biggest
tell them
things
God
that
is real. Oh no, not that. All right, never
uh,
mind.
some of the
Go ahead.
biggest things have been You know, one of the big things is personal experience. When people actually say that they don't think God exists because they've never experienced God, or God has never come and talked to them, I'm like, dude,
It's
that's
huge. It's
ridiculous.
huge. I hear that 100 times a day. That's
I
the thing
do.
I
I
hear
you
the
know
most.
I hear that stuff all the time. I think it's ridiculous. And so I'm trying to correct that by being when I argue against someone's religious supernatural experience, I don't use an argument that just debunks their experience. That's why I don't talk about, oh, it was actually just chemicals in your brain doing that. I don't say that. I talk about the unreliability of personal experience. So no atheist watching can agree with me and then also consider their personal experience to be better than this religious one's, because it's just not. They're a person just like
Okay.
this other person. And so there's that. But the biggest thing now is I get people in. One of my biggest videos as of late has been like Muslim feminist accidentally debunks or discredits Islam. That's a really provocative, sounds like it's going to be this like 2015 anti SJW crap. It sounds like that. It draws people in and they're like, oh
Right.
man, yeah, I want to watch him destroy this stupid Muslim feminist. And you get in
Right.
there and it's very, very level-handed. It's very cool-headed. It's just going to be like a very high level of discourse and things that if you are some other religion or believe in some other holy text, I'm also going to be getting on your case through my arguments, but just saying that Islam is my subject at the moment, like talking about the reliability of scripture. So I say all that stuff, and so hopefully people come in expecting, oh, Muslim feminists destroyed, and what they get is this person calmly and rationally talking about what they think is reliable in determining the truth of these statements. And then also advocating for a high level of discourse and for respect for the people making claims, even if they're wrong. And so that's the real Trojan horse of my channel. Is it seems provocative on the surface, then people watch and they're like, oh, he's not a jackass. And that's actually that
Right.
happened to my parents. They saw my titles and thumbnails and stuff, and they actually told me they would never watch. And then my brother-in-law went in and watched every single one of my videos and then basically urged my parents, you have to watch this. They did, and they were like, this is really,
Oh, this is
really,
reasonable.
yeah,
This is
it's the same things
reasonable.
that you've said about my stuff. You know, it's like, hey, this is the way to do it. Like, at least you're encouraging people to be friendly, you know,
Yeah,
and so
no,
that's good.
totally. I have absolutely no complaints about your videos at all in terms of. I mean, the quality of the content is good. You and Godless Cranium have two of the best channels as far as I'm concerned. Um, you did that. Are you talking about the video you did with Rationality Rules? By the way, you did one with him
Yeah,
like 2 weeks ago. That's
yeah.
the one you're talking about with the feminists. Okay, I watched
Mhm.
that. Are you friends with that dude? Do you know
Yeah,
him at
yeah,
all? Or
yeah. Steve and I collaborated, I think, about a year ago, and that was one of my first. That might have been the first collaboration on my channel, and that actually got me in Cosmic Skeptics awareness. Cosmic Skeptics subscribed to me at that time when I collabed with Steve, and then Cosmic Skeptic offered to collaborate with me in December. So just a few months later, and that's what like really made my channel blow up. I went from 5,000 to 10,000 in like 2 weeks.
okay, because that's why I was so surprised by the 2 year thing because
Yeah,
you know Matt Dillahunty too, right? Are you friends with him too?
I just
Or you
met
just
Matt Dillahunty, and that was because I went on Talk Heathen, and he was in the audience, and
Talk
I just
Heathen
talked to him
is
that day.
is is an offshoot of Atheist Experience, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's produced by the same organization, so same studio.
And are you going to be a regular on there? Because that's a pretty cool thing if you are.
I actually Dan is starting his own show, and I'll probably be a regular on there
Oh,
instead.
that's even better because Dan's will probably go quick. Dan's will, see, there's a much better infrastructure for your crew in terms of popular atheism.
Yeah,
You know, it kind of it proceeds naturally. Like I don't know if you know Sirius the Skeptic yet. He was on my
yeah, I do.
show. He was on my channel. He's gonna have like 25, 30,000 relatively soon because there's an infrastructure. You know, you start collaborating with the guy you mentioned, Skeptic, Cosmic Skeptic. That's the
Yeah.
English dude, right?
Hmm.
And then next thing you know, you've got 5,000 more subscribers, and you just it's a lot easier to jump up the ladder in terms
Right.
of growing your channel. It's good.
Right.
it's to be modeled. If there's a Christian listening, it's one of the things I'm going to start telling us, we got to follow these guys. They're building it correctly.
Well, the thing is that, I mean, just if you look around anywhere in the South, you see that uh, Christians do really well in building community, and there's some really great, and a lot of atheists don't like to hear this, which I think is kind of dumb, but there are a lot of really positive and encouraging Christian communities around here, and
Right.
like communities that if you join, these people genuinely will love you and want to build you up. Now, they believe some things that I ultimately think could be harmful for you, but they also have a lot of things that are really good for you, like having community. I think that you can have all of those things outside of religion, and just at least where I am in Texas, the really connected communities, a lot of them come from churches. And not really the fundamentalist ones now. Maybe back in the day that was the case, but the more non-denominational
Right.
people.
Like we go to church in Thousand Oaks that, for example, they have a little fund, and if you need to help paying bills, you
Yeah,
can go to the church, the pastor, and he'll hook you up. I actually
yeah,
know a lot of the people at the church. My friend works on the worship team. We don't go very often, and when we went to locally in Malibu, I knew almost everybody who went to the church. Really quickly, we moved to a different town. We moved across country, and she started attending the church. Then we both started attending, and really quickly we had 80 friends, and something to do on Wednesday and Friday night. So that wasn't a big thing for me. I'm totally cool as a loner, but that's a big thing for a lot of people.
hmm and
That's a big. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So we see the church and a lot of success that in getting people together and hopefully at least enriching people's lives. A lot of success the church has had in that, and we look at that and say, all of the things that are really positive about that we could replicate without any necessarily the dogmatic parts of it, or really just anything supernatural at all. We want people that don't believe something supernatural to be able to have a community that they can come to and feel loved and feel safe, but also feel challenged in certain ways, and all that great stuff. It's just kind of basic backbone of any nonprofit organization. And the atheist community of Austin is very much like that. As much as you may see the atheist experience and how combative they can be on there, that community is the closest thing to a very positive, like loving church outside of
Right.
church that I've ever seen. They're great, and they do a lot of good work with that. And I want a lot more communities like that to pop up. And so this transitions well into street epistemology. If you wanted to talk about that, the reason why I'm in the atheist community really has nothing to do with, maybe it used to, but it doesn't have anything to do with what I want from the atheist community or what the atheist community is. It has
Mm-hmm.
to do with what I want it to be and what I want to make it. That has a lot more to do with why I'm in the first place. So I make these videos not because I'm like trying to just get this confirmation from people that I respect or something. Maybe I felt like that at the beginning, but now I want to push the atheist community to be something better than it already is. Not to say it's bad or something, but just always being something better. And that's why I'm in here.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. No, I definitely see that. I definitely get that. Um, Street epistemology. What is it exactly? How are you? Is that what you and Dan are going to be doing when you have the show?
Yeah, it involves street epistemology for sure. It's not a dedicated street epistemology show, and Dan will be the host. I'll just be a guest on there occasionally. I've been helping him out with the test shows, as you know.
I
But
watched his.
street
He's got this.
epistemology,
He showed up at this Bible study. This girl Rachel in reality. Do you know her?
yeah, she's a friend of mine.
Okay. Tell her to come on my show too. If you can get Dan on my show, get her. Because I watched their
I
Bible
bet she
study
would.
the other night. She would? Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Because she's like a
she's a good
1 year
friend.
atheist. She's a baby atheist too. She's like 1 year,
Yeah.
1 year in, or something like that. I can't believe you're a baby atheist. It's the weirdest thing in the world. It's so. I mean, listen to you talk. Listen to you just talk to me. And this is what I want to do for the atheist community. And I want to build up. I mean, it's like you've been an atheist for like 25 years or something. You're
Hey,
not even
well,
25 years old.
like I said, I'm the first in 4 generations not to be a missionary. trying to do the
So you're
best you can to build people up, to help people, to make people have better lives. That's in my blood. And I can't
right.
fight against
Missionary
that.
zeal goes through your veins, and you're like, you're just applying it all to atheism.
Yeah.
It's like Matt Dillahunty. Matt Dillahunty's got like preacher written all over him. It's just, you know, he's doing it for the devil. That's all.
Yeah, yeah,
if, only,
exactly.
if only he would use his powers for good instead of evil, Drew. Um, now, what is the street epistemology? Explain this. Do you know Anthony Mena?
Magna Bosco? Yeah.
Yes.
So street
Is he?
epistemology, it originated with Peter Boghossian. He wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists, which a lot of us in the community, street epistemology community, kind of consider an unfortunate title, because the street epistemology community is not just like the atheist community. It's a little different, and it's not just for atheism. And if you go into the street epistemology study groups online, we're not talking about atheism the vast majority of the time. We talk about all kinds of claims. So
Right, but you're putting someone on the defensive already if you title it "How to Create Atheists."
yeah,
Then
and
you
that's not
already
what we want
like
to
you
do.
see Anthony Magnabosco and you're like you don't want to talk to him because you're like, wait, he's going to turn me into an atheist. I've heard a few
Right.
Christians talk like that. I would never think that way myself, but I've heard one or two Christians say to me, you know, I wouldn't even go there. I wouldn't do that because I wouldn't want that challenge to my faith. You know.
Well, you grew up mostly secular. You've seen tons of challenges to your faith. You grew up with around tons of people who would be challenging to faith, and yet you're still Christian. What do you have to be afraid of?
Oh
A
no,
lot of people
I'm not talking
have
about
that same
me.
experience as
Right.
you.
Yeah, exactly. No, I came about a totally different way. That's why there's really I can't see anything being any type of challenge in that sense because you know I was done with the world and its ways by the time I was 29. You know,
Yeah.
I'd been there. I'd done that, Drew. I'd been there and done that. I was finished. I tasted it all.
Yeah.
But
And a lot of people
okay,
haven't
so
gone through that, and you have, and so maybe that's one of the reasons why they see it as like this scary thing. But no, I'm glad that you don't. But to explain the method, basically, street epistemology is a method of having conversation. It's based basically on the Socratic method,
okay,
and so it basically involves always building rapport with someone and making sure that you connect to them and treat them as an actual human being and not for bad intentions. It really is to connect with people. And if you're bad at connecting with people, you don't care about the people you're talking to, you're going to really suck at street epistemology. And a lot of us don't really encourage people that are trying to take advantage or just
is
prove
there
a
are there
point to
pointers they give
take
you
it up.
in that direction? Do they give you like a way of it's more helpful to say this, it's more helpful to do this? Are there pointers in terms of bonding?
Not really. That's kind of like Jehovah's Witnesses have a lot of methods about that, like about even missionary dating type things or making friends with someone just to try to convert them. In street epistemology, like if you do that, people will criticize you. Like don't do that. That's manipulative.
Okay.
Um, so really, the way that we say is like, so you want to change people's minds. Why? Okay, I want to change people's minds because I want people to believe something similar to me. Like, okay, why should they believe something similar to you? Because I think this is the best way to live. Why would you want someone to believe something that's like, the best way to live? Why would you want them to live in the best way possible? Well, because I care about them. Okay, so why are you talking to them? Because I care about them. There you go. You don't need specific methods there. If you actually care, if you actually give a damn, then you should be able to connect with people,
Right.
and that's what it's about. And if you're doing it in a fake way, then it's not encouraged. I think Dan and I both can attest to that. Street epistemology has really changed our lives and made us more compassionate because it's like, yeah, we want to change
Doing
minds, but
doing it.
yeah, and realizing, you know what, like
Because Dan
I
received
really,
it.
really care about.
Dan received it. He was on that Anthony Manuel the video.
Yeah. And he realized that Anthony wasn't out there to just try to like, oh, I'm going to deconvert you, whatever, and then just leave. That's not what he was there for. He was there because he cares about all those students and he feels like he has something. some important questions to ask them, so hopefully they can have some important realizations in their lives. And what really evidences that Anthony cares is, I mean, Anthony talked to him in San Antonio, and then they had to meet in a certain place, and Anthony drove super far for that. And then the first time, like, basically he gave Dan gas money so he could even make it. And then he didn't care, he didn't even know what the talk was going to be. He was like, I just want to be there and talk to you. I'm not going to try street epistemology. I just want to hear what you have to say. And you're telling me it's really important to you to say this. So, and then he shows up and says basically kind of what Anthony wants to hear, but Anthony wasn't there to just get what he wanted to hear out of Dan. And then just a lot of different things in their experience with each other since then. I mean, when Dan came to Faithless Forum, which is where I met him, he came along kind of with Anthony to help Anthony out. And, he wanted to come anyway, but he came to help Anthony out to a certain extent. And Anthony just kind of was like, hey, dude, so don't you have school like tomorrow? What do you, or don't like school or work tomorrow? Like, are you going to be cool? You drove all the way, from where you live up to Dallas. Like, this seems like a lot for you. And he's like, oh, no, Anthony, I'm fine. And Anthony gives him like $100. And just like try to help him out, like made sure that he had a room before he left Dan alone and all this kind of stuff. Anthony is a really caring person, and that's why he does it. And there are a lot of times when, Anthony doesn't express when he's mad, but there are times when Anthony can be mad, but he's not going out there and going off to get some emotional release to like go off on people he thinks have dumb ideas or something, because that is not actually helpful, not beneficial for anyone. It's kind of abusive of other people and only fun for him, so he doesn't do it. And so all that to say, that is kind of what
is he the most well-known is he the most well-known practitioner? Because he's the only one I've ever heard of, and I heard of him before you guys. Somebody else had told me to watch his videos or something.
Probably so. I mean, it was invented by Peter Boghossian, but Peter Boghossian isn't out here having those conversations on the street or filming them or anything like that. He's he's a full-time professor and speaker. And so Anthony, he's pretty much the main one. He's actually developed the method, I would say, just as much as Peter has at this point. So
right, yeah, I've watched like 4 of his videos or something like that. Go ahead.
And just getting back to the method of it, kind of went on a tangent about caring about people there, but really, the only things that street epistemology teaches in specifics is, so what are the different types of claims and what types of questions? Sometimes specifically, what questions can you ask? But there's never a script. Like, we completely object to having a script. That's really manipulative. And basically, you start a conversation. If you start to finish for an SE conversation, you talk to someone. Most SE conversations come from just meeting someone or just talking to someone you already know. It's not going out and trying to talk to them on the street like Anthony does. That's the vast minority. But just talking to someone that makes a claim, someone says, oh, essential oils cure cancer or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. I want to talk to you about that if that's cool. And you make sure they're okay with it and all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And you just ask them questions about why they came to believe that. And you genuinely want to know. If you don't actually want to know, don't do it.
Right.
That's a big deal. So listen to what they actually have to say.
So you're basically saying you don't do it, as much as it may seem it if you're watching Anthony's videos, you're not doing it just to get a result. You're really, as you're describing it, it's really just trying to have an honest conversation. If it results in somebody losing their faith, Anthony's like, whatever, but I didn't mean it, It's just trying to have an honest conversation. It's not necessarily trying to pull somebody out of there. It's not trying to deconvert somebody per se. Correct?
It's like you could think of that as being your goal, but the thing is that the way that the method works is that if you have a really shaky belief and you go out and practice it, your questions are going to be turning on you. You're going to end up getting into some questions that are going to shake your reasoning or shake your confidence in your reasoning for your certain beliefs. And
right,
so
there's a disconnect.
You can.
What?
Oh no, go ahead.
I'm just saying. No, okay. There's a disconnect between. I haven't really thought this through yet, but I was trying to get this out when I was talking to Shannon about her deconversion. There's a disconnect between examining beliefs and what part of the belief is actually relevant and what's not. In other words, which
Okay.
not everything that is an examination of why you believe something is really all that important. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's a disconnect there between what's an actual game changer that would shake. This is where I was trying to get with you. I was trying to epistemologize you. I didn't do a very good job. That's what I was trying to do when I was exploring your deconversion at the beginning of our conversation. I was trying to get at not necessarily to do anything in you, but it's really only for my own understanding. Why is this a game changer and not that? Why I get why some people become atheists. I totally get why you would not become a Bible literalist and start taking some class and be like, wait a minute, get that completely. But why a game change? Why this a game changer? Why is that not a game changer? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's very
Street
personal.
epistemology has a lot to do with that.
Right, but it's very
Yeah,
personal.
so
It's deeply personal.
and it's a personal thing, and so that's why you want to make sure that people are consenting with the conversation, they're okay with having this, and that you're doing it in a compassionate way, because you're talking about personal stuff that really deeply affects people, and you don't want to do that if someone feels like, oh, you're forcing it on them, or they're not prepared for it, or they really don't enjoy it. Don't do it. You need a willing
Right.
participant for it to be ethical at all.
Right.
And and so that's why a lot of the time street epistemology is practiced when other people bring up claims, not when you go flag someone down and say, hey, let's have this conversation. That's not really what it's like most of the time. Those kind of happen for, I mean, it's Anthony's hobby. It's a lot of people's hobby now, but primarily that happens so that people can have examples to show other people of how street epistemology can be applied.
Now you've tried it. You've done it out in the street. You and Dan
I haven't
together?
done it out in the street. I use it. I mean, like I said, it's not usually practiced it in the street. But I've used it in my personal life and with people making claims all the time. I use it maybe slightly more on atheists now because I see people,
To
like we
get them
talked
to have
about.
better
You see
ideas.
atheists talking about like, oh, I can use my personal experience to prove God doesn't exist or something, or like God's never showed up to me, so therefore he's not real. I use it to
have
talk
better
about claims like that.
arguments.
Right.
To make better arguments for your squad.
Yeah, so I asked them questions about what method they used to determine that was true, and if it's really reliable, if it's a really good way to actually come to truth. And a lot of the time, people can get really defensive at first, but then they realize you're just asking questions, and they're like, "Oh, you're not trying to troll. You're just asking some questions." Okay. And sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, huh. Actually, I don't really know the answer to that. I'm not sure. I'll have to think more about it." And
Right, which is what happened to Dan, right? He started.
Yeah.
Dan started deconverting because of that video that he posted, correct? Or no?
Yeah. It was because of the conversation that that Anthony and Dan had, that Dan got to a point where it was actually his specific reason, and the reason why Anthony was able to discuss with Dan what his specific reason for believing was, or being a practicing Christian at least was that Anthony asked, like, what's your number one reason? What's your biggest reason? Like, if it crumbled away, then you wouldn't believe. What is that? Because ultimately, that's what we're talking about. That's what's most important. If you talk about secondary things, it's not a big deal.
That's kind of what I said. That's deeply personal.
Right.
What's the game changer? Like
Right.
for somebody being a Bible literalist, that's why a lot of the questions that get debated back and forth between atheists and Christians, I'm starting to find that I don't even care enough to enter the conversations because those questions are somewhat meaningless to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And that's actually a really good term for it, is a game changer. Like, what is the game changer? And, Dan specifically gave him his definition of faith, which was his game changer. And then Anthony talked about, how we could reliably determine something being true using that definition of faith, like through the process of faith, a type of faith that Dan had. And Dan ultimately was like, actually, I don't know. I can't actually say how that could be done. I have to think about it some more. And then Anthony's like, all right, I'm not pushing any further than that. You know, if you don't know, you don't know. You need to think about it more. There you go. I'm not saying, oh, well, it's because you can't, because that doesn't help.
Okay, two quick questions.
Yep.
Is there a book on epistemology that isn't necessarily Christian or atheist? It isn't necessarily one way or the other, like just explaining, justify, like a
Um,
decent book that'd be a fun to read that's not, that you know of offhand. If you don't know, just say, I don't know. I don't know is a fine
like
answer, Drew. Just say, I don't know.
on epistemology
Yes,
or on street epistemology.
either. Well, street
Uh,
epistemology, that would be atheism. So I'll check out that Peter Boghossian book or whatever it's called. I'll
yeah.
definitely check that out.
Yeah. A Manual for Creating Atheists is the kind of street epistemology book. Um, as far as epistemology goes, uh, I don't know if I can really say one book because there's going to be so much and it's going to go back so far. I mean, it's like saying, is there a book on metaphysics that I could read to understand metaphysics? It's like
Right.
there's so many
But
ideas.
if you ask somebody, is there a book on metaphysics? You know, some people just go, oh yeah. You know, atheists might go, yeah, read Bertrand Russell, read, you know, or so if there's nothing that just pops into your mind, don't worry about it. I
I don't know if
thought
I
you
can get to
might
a
have had.
specific work, but I would say that's something that would probably be uh, relevant to the stuff that I'm talking about and relevant to some of the ideas of street epistemology. I might say the work of David Hume. Um,
Okay.
I don't know if there's an actual specific work there. Um,
No,
but
but there's the whole foundation, the famous Hume, how you justify your beliefs, and I get
right,
that.
right. And so yeah, being familiar with a lot of Hume's ideas are relevant to the conversation that we're having here. And you could be able, you should probably be able to do that honestly just through Wikipedia, and
Yeah, that's what I was
obviously
just thinking.
clicking on things that are reputable sources linked to that Wikipedia page is a good way to do it.
Right. I was just thinking because the thing that Anthony's going off of is probably a watered down version of Hume, Socrates, things. So the source might not even be all that important in terms of just to find out the underlying. I just don't know that much about epistemology as a science. I know a few things: justify
Yeah.
beliefs, how you just. It's a study of how you justify your beliefs, right? I
Yeah.
know that. Um,
Yeah, no, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I mean, yeah, there's not one singular source you go back to necessarily, but yeah, doing some quick reading on Wikipedia would probably actually be pretty helpful on that.
that's probably the best. The apps. Go ahead.
The weird thing for
The weird
me is
what?
I had never read any of those philosophers or anything because I wasn't really allowed to growing up. Um, but I actually went on a media blackout when I started realizing I was seriously questioning Christianity. And I was kind of thinking of myself as an agnostic Christian or agnostic theist. Like I no longer thought I could 100% prove God existed anymore. I just thought like, oh, it's up in the air. Like it's a question now. Um, I went on a media blackout to where I basically just I wouldn't read anything that was opposing Christianity. I saw some of my normal typical stuff that was for Christianity. I read things like from C.S. Lewis, from William Lane Craig during that time. Um,
Right.
that kind of thing, and some of the things I grew up with, some of the stuff is a little bit more extended past that. And after that media blackout, I was like, I basically come up with a lot of the ideas that I now realize are a lot of Hume's, a lot of Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. I'd come up with those things kind of on my own, just not in completely developed, polished form,
Right.
because I felt like I had just tried to be like, what is reliable? What can I show to be self-evident the best that I possibly can? I got all the way down to the axiomatic, and I went up from there. And that's when I was really having issues with being able to determine that anything supernatural existed. And so now it's funny that once I came out of that media blackout and I realized, oh, this is the stuff that I think. I went around and looked around to see if there were objections to those, and I couldn't find any that were to my satisfaction. And then I looked up if those had ever been invented, and I was like, This is literally just the basis of epistemology. This is epistemology 101, and a lot of this is like scientific method 101. And I was really proud of myself for having come up with a lot of that stuff on my own, obviously informed by my education and the culture. But yeah, that had a lot to do with it for me. So yeah, anyway, that's the place to go. And it's
Question number
interesting.
two. Question number two is, did you ever do street evangelism when you were a Christian?
Say that again.
Did you ever do street evangelism when you were a Christian?
Not street evangelism as you might think of it, like flagging people down in public.
Yeah, and like
I
saying,
did.
here's a pamphlet on Jesus, and did you know Jesus died for your sins? That type of thing. Jesus loves you.
So I didn't go out in public and do that. A lot of that having to do with the fact that my parents were kind of hover parents and thought that would be dangerous for me to go out and do that.
Okay.
And so I didn't do that. However, I did have those conversations and those interactions without that part of it. So I did door knocking, like with my church and with a partner. I did that in junior high and high school, to where I would
So
go
you
door to
tried to
door and talk about that kind of stuff.
evangelize, and how did that go?
Yes.
What was that like? Did you bring
Actually,
anybody to the Lord? And did you call them back
yes.
up and go, sorry, I did that? Like, did you call them later? Have you called them recently and said, you know what? I changed my mind. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think I brought a few people to Christ. And the thing was, it's about the experiences. Again, people say, oh yeah, I brought this person to Christ once. I'm like, are you serious? Once? Try a dozen times in a year. Like, what are you talking about? You know? And for me, that was completely normal. We were evangelical. That's what we did. And I wasn't even the one who did that the most. I was just one of the best at it around in my church, which admittedly probably wasn't that hard because everyone didn't really encourage education except for my parents, which was ultimately probably their downfall a little bit. But yeah, I did door to door, like door knocking, we'd call it. And I also evangelized to a lot of my friends. Like I said, I skated. And so I had a lot of friends that were friends with me through like meeting at skate parks or meeting like online on like skate videos and skate forums and stuff. I'd meet them in person. Right. I would like evangelize to them. I even evangelized to 2 kids from Denmark at skate camp. Skate camp actually was a pretty common place for me to do that. I witnessed to a Catholic, very like non-practicing Catholic kid from Northern California at one point. And he said he had never heard the salvation message. And I just almost crapped my pants when I heard that. I thought that was the most insane thing I'd ever heard. This kid was raised Catholic and he's never heard the salvation message. Like he couldn't even name the 4 gospels. And that was insane to me. He went to a Catholic school. And yeah. And so anyway, I did that. So there's a lot of instances of me doing that. I did that a little bit in college, and I did it a lot online on forums that I was on. So yeah, I did a lot of that kind of stuff.
And you were good at it. You were good at it.
I think I was pretty good at it. I think I came across then very similar to how I come across now, but then I may have come across as I'm a little bit more uneasy with your position if you disagree with me than now. That might have been part of it, but I think I was pretty good at it. People told me I was pretty good at it, and then I had like a way with words and
what's strange about
explaining complicated simply. So,
well, what's strange about you now? I don't know if it's strange is the right word, but you seem very at peace with with your journey to atheism. It was way quicker than most people's, and I sense a lot less existential struggle in it. And I don't really understand why. What would be the big difference? I mean, maybe you're just, I don't know. You're definitely different from most of the people that, at least there's a whole, I would say 70% of the atheists that I know, or a big chunk of them, were former Christians. Most of them talk about a big existential struggle from walking away from Christianity, a process of years and some anguish and agony involved. And I don't sense any of that in you. Any. I would say the person I sense it the least in is maybe Shannon. I don't sense that much in her either. But other people, it's, torn about it, guilt and anguish, and Sturm and Drang all over the place. I don't sense that in you. Go ahead.
Well, for me, there was anguish there. A lot of it had to do with feeling isolated and outcast and hated and, like not worth anything because I thought that everyone was going to cast me out. Because I mean, you can understand with how I was raised, I'd never even talked to a liberal before, like much less an atheist, and so
Right.
hearing
So I
that,
would
it
think
just,
I'd be enormous amounts of existential. It's just for me personally. One of the reasons why I've never even thought about not being a Democrat is that it would kill my mother. It would literally kill her. I couldn't do that to her. It would never even occur to me. Even though my wife is a Republican, and sometimes I'm like, I hate them both so much. I'm not sure I care. I could easily see myself, being a moderate Republican and not caring at all. But it would totally destroy her, so I wouldn't even think of it. So there'd be
yeah.
over something that simple. It's that kind of irrelevant. I consider it kind of irrelevant. You can be a moderate Democrat, a moderate Republican. It's not that big of a difference. So I consider it sort of irrelevant. There would be enormous amounts of existential angst and conflict in me. I just don't sense anywhere near the proportions that it exists in other atheists who are in similar circumstances in you.
Well,
Do
here's the
you see
thing
that too?
is that I, from a very young age, well, first of all, I grew up in a much better home than most people,
I
and
was thinking that. That's a big
yeah,
thing I was thinking.
I
You're
was I was
secure in your
grown I grew
family's
up in a
love. I know that. I
yes,
would
yeah,
guess that.
definitely. And I never once thought that my parents wouldn't love me because of this. I just thought that maybe that they wouldn't really want to have a whole lot of contact with me. But the worst thing was I thought that my mom thought that I was going to go to hell, and I thought that would make her depressed. And that's one of the biggest things that made me really in anguish. And
Right.
I didn't really have much nerves coming out to a lot of people except for them because I just really thought that my mom thought that I would be burning in hell and that would just destroy her. Like I thought that she'd have no life ever again after finding out. And then she was like, no, Drew, your salvation's permanent. You were a real Christian and you can't be unsaved because that's the theology we believed. Just a lot of people thought you were never a real Christian if you deconverted because that was impossible. But apparently my parents do think it's possible. So I thought that was interesting and it was good. That was the first thing I asked. I was like, I consider myself an agnostic atheist. I don't believe in God. And like 2 minutes went by. So do you think that like I lost my salvation? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, good. I'm not nervous anymore. But from a very young age, I was loved and I never had to question that. So that's a huge thing for me.
Yeah,
But
I
another
get
thing
that.
is that I was taught when you have a problem emotionally or when you have a problem with your beliefs, so we'll take emotionally first. What you do is you tackle it head on and try to figure out how to cope so that you're living a healthy life and it doesn't eat you up inside and destroy you. You don't shove away your emotional problems and say, "Oh, I'm not going to deal with this." You don't put it in a bottle. You deal with it and you cope with it in a healthy way. And my mom takes that to an extreme and my dad takes that to a different extreme. He bottles too much. So I got a perfect storm. I saw the right amount of bottling with certain parts of my dad and I saw the right amount of coping and tackling things with my mom, and so I was able to learn that. Another thing is that with my Christian faith, I was taught if you think that something doesn't make sense, and you hear for instance millions of years from a science teacher in a science lesson, you don't ignore it. You don't throw it away and pretend like fingers in your ears, la la la, doesn't exist. I was never encouraged to do that because then you have a weak faith. What you do is you see that and you tackle it head on. You have to learn how to reconcile that with your faith. Just like in that astronomy paper, I had to reconcile the ancient origins of light with my Christian faith, and I did. And so that's what you always did is you tackled all your problems head on and you didn't push them into a corner. So as soon as I started growing up and realized, whoa, I've been pushing some questions into a corner for 2 years, I was like, I need to get my butt in gear and tackle these head on like I've always done. And so I did. I tackled it as hard as I possibly could and studied and thought this is the biggest question I can ask myself. And so in doing that, it brought me to a different conclusion. And that brought some emotional issues along with it because of, coping and potentially being an outcast and no one knowing and all that kind of stuff. And so I thought I need to tackle these emotional problems head on. And then at that point, I had a counseling psychology degree as well. So I'm very well versed in cognitive behavioral therapy, which ultimately, when you go to a counselor for cognitive behavioral therapy, it is teaching you how to question yourself in order to come to more reasonable and comfortable ideas about the world. And
Okay.
so I use that on myself. And so every belief, every question I had theologically, I tackled head on as soon as I realized I had it. And I've always done that except for that 2-year gap. And then with emotional problems, I've done the same thing. A lot of people, I don't understand how people can go through life, coasting by and having issues that they just don't want to deal with and putting them off like that. I just can't do it. I have to tackle things head on. And so for me, I think that's come to really help me be more mentally healthy and like live with intent. So I live with a very strong intent and purpose because, and not for any divine purpose, but there are certain things that I want and I think are good, and I'm going to go out and get them. And that's kind of what I was always taught. My mom is even more like that than me. And so that's what I'll do. And I admire people that are also like that, like my wife, for instance. And so that may be it. And I try to encourage people to also be like that. That girl Rachel in reality and Dan, two
Mhm.
people that are like that more than anyone I've ever known, and definitely
What? Really?
more like that than a lot of people I've known in the atheist community. And so it's
When you say like that, how would you summarize what you just explained? Someone who's what?
someone who is constantly looking to improve themselves at every turn, and someone who, when they see that they have discrepancies in their beliefs or like in the way that they cope emotionally, they're out there
Uh-huh.
to improve that situation as much as they possibly can. And it's a tiring thing, but they put the effort forward to do it, and they're always better people for it. And so they both know that that's one of the reasons why I respect them so much, and they're both really good friends of mine.
Really?
So
So cool. So get both
yeah.
of them to come on. Get both of them to come on. This has been a good experience for you, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. So both of them are coming on my show. You're gonna help me get them. I'm gonna
I
land
think
them.
I
I'm
can
gonna land
probably
a
do
big
that. I
fish.
appreciate you letting me talk your ear off and everything. I like talking to someone who isn't going to necessarily look at me and my platform and think that I'm right about everything and that I'm not going to mess up. And if I do mess up, they'll be like, "Oh, what about this?" Or it doesn't come from my perspective or something. I like being able to talk to you about that and also show atheists, hey, don't be a dumbass. Talk to Christians. They're fine. Don't
Right. Well,
freak out.
you're showing atheists in a totally different light. You come on my channel because you're it's I mean this has been really interesting for me just from a experience of listening because there's a lot of things about you that I just don't fundamentally understand. More so that not yeah, don't understand. There's a lot. You're a very different person than I am. So hearing your deconversion journey, and you went into depth about it to a certain degree. So I have the beginnings of, I have some, the beginning inklings of understanding, but there's a lot about you that I just don't fundamentally understand. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about some of this stuff because,
Well,
just is.
I look forward to being able to talk to you some more about it and talk to you again about it. I honestly wish I had time to do like streams and podcasts and stuff like that. In that case, that I'd always want to bring you on there and have conversations about this because you're you're someone different from a lot of the Christians that I grew up around. And now that's not to say that I never knew anyone that was down to earth or reasonable or anything. A lot of my friends right now tend to be that way, but I haven't met a whole lot of people that are as interested in talking about things that could be potentially challenging for the sake of making themselves kind of a better person or understanding others or building bridges or whatever your MO is.
Right.
So
I think
I
for these
appreciate talking to you about
particular,
that.
yeah, no, I thought this has been absolutely awesome. This is exactly what I wanted to happen. Even more so with GC. Did you listen to my chat with GC? You'll like it. Um,
I did, yeah.
I,
I really enjoyed that a lot, and that's why I was really excited about coming on here.
right, but this was even better. I thought. GC, forget that guy. It's yesterday's news. Gee, godless who cares? No, that one went well, but this was actually more what I was more towards what I was trying to do when I'm getting atheists on the show, is to try and dig into their experience with deconversion and their experience with Christianity. Really, honestly, for my own edification. Honestly, I mean, that's the first part of the goal, is to just try and understand it better, because there's a lot of stuff I just don't get. Um, there's just a lot of things I don't understand about your experience, and that's holds true for most of the atheists out there, especially the ones who started out as Christians. So that's a lot of what I'm trying to do, is just, get a better handle on it, understand it better. So this was
Well,
perfect as far as I was concerned.
for
Go
me,
ahead.
the two things that I admire about people the most, especially when we're talking like more first impressions, is when someone is willing to say I don't know, and then when someone is willing to go and kind of put themselves on the line to find out. Those are two things that are extremely important to me. People that admit when they, it's a flaw in belief or a flaw in knowledge, not a flaw in character, to say that I don't know. I think that's actually a great character trait. But admit when they have a flaw in that way, and then do their best to fix it without, beating themselves up about it, because it's okay to not know about something, and it's a really good thing to admit it so that you can learn. So I try
Right.
to be that way as much as possible. And, like in my first conversation with you, and when I'd seen you talk to other people, I saw that you would say, I don't know about that. And I'm like, that is so refreshing, because I talk to Christians and atheists and Muslims and all those kind of people. They all think they know everything. They all think they're right. And that's
Well,
just ridiculous. I don't care what their position is.
well, there's a twofold problem with one is when we're talking with atheists on a conversation like this, it generally breaks down into more of a contest.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's fine. Sometimes that's fun. You go on a debate and say, like, listen, you're wrong. You lying sack of dung, and I'll tell you why. That's fine in the context of an actual contest, but it
Yeah.
gets tedious in terms of a
Yes.
conversation. Someone coming on my channel. That's not what I want to happen at all. Not even a little. I'm not trying to contest you at all. The other thing that happens, and Christians do this a lot, just because I think I know what God wants me to do in certain situations, and I know what God's saying to me, and I honestly do live a very, very committed Christian life. I don't know if I've made that clear. I don't. It's not my goal to make it clear, but there's only one or two things that I would say I absolutely know for certain about what I think God wants me to do, and outside of that, I have no idea. It's one thing to say, like, the Bible says this, and my interpretation of what the Bible says is 100% the only way it can be interpreted. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's actually not a good way approach. So, that's the essence of dogmatic, is when you think that your hearing from God is the absolutely only way to hear, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's
Definitely.
what and there's somewhat, I like to keep some of these things more open-ended. I do have 100. I'm as hardcore of a Christian as some of the other Christians. I just, when I'm talking to people who don't share my beliefs, I can shelve it and have an honest conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I try to influence atheists to be that same way, because you're not, you know, quote unquote, like dogmatic in a religion or something, doesn't mean that you are
Aren't
actually open to
dogmatic,
having honest conversations.
right?
So
It
yeah,
doesn't
or,
mean you're
or
not
aren't
dogmatic.
dogmatic, because some people are.
This is what I was trying to explain to. I knew dogmatic punk rockers. Nobody knew what I was talking about when I said I knew punk rockers who were religious. If you didn't
Oh
have the,
man.
the Doc Martens and the white laces, and you didn't have this, your jeans rolled up a certain way, you weren't kosher. You weren't with the crew, and
Oh,
they
I
were
saw that so
really
much.
dogmatic about this stuff.
Yep.
So I'm.
Yeah,
It's not
you play
just
a guitar
religious
solo and
people.
they're like, "Oh, is that Freebird?"
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, exactly. And you play the wrong thing, or New York, they're so hardcore about some things. Like if you say I like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and you'll get a quiz. Oh yeah, you know Freaky Styley, right? Yes, I know Freaky Styley. Do you know? And if you say, like, if you cite an album that's too new, Oh, you're into their newer stuff. You know, you'll get this whole stupid game that people play with everything.
Yep.
New Yorkers are terrible about that. They don't do it in
Yep.
California because nobody knows anything. In New York, they do that about everything. I know, like, you know, people who serve coffee in New York who, if you say, oh, yeah, I'm into this director, dang, you got to know every movie he's done. And you have to have seen him, you know?
Yep, I've definitely seen that. It transcends all types of beliefs for sure. And it doesn't matter that we have different conclusions about things. We both are on the same side, and in my opinion, about fighting that kind of nonsense. So
Yeah, or just not participating. The way you fight that kind of nonsense is you just don't participate. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
that's
it's a
you
total
just
war games
not.
thing.
It's yeah, you're just not interested. You know, I'm not talking to you about. I'm not talking to you about atheism because I want to prove to you in the course of a conversation on my channel that God is real. I'm not sure that that's a goal that can be accomplished. Now, if we were in a debate and there's a big audience and that's what I'm supposed to do in the context of a debate, you know, that's a contest. That's a different game, right?
Right.
But no, I'm not.
Yep.
I'm not taking you on the channel so that I can go. Well, did you ever consider this? I'm sure you probably did. You probably did, actually. Yeah, actually, I did. Oh, okay. Well, did you consider this when you were reading the Bible? Did you? You know, I mean, I'm sure there are questions I could ask you along those lines, but that's not actually the agenda that I had in mind when I was getting atheists to
Right.
come on the show. It's more trying to find out how they, you know, hearing them. I'm doing
Yeah.
epistemology. This is my epistemology. This is my version of it.
And that's why I come on here not trying to prove my points. I'm just trying to explain, where I came from and what my reasoning was, so that I can, because that's what you're wanting to know, so that's what I'm giving you, rather than putting it in an argument form. Because I'm not turning it on you and saying, well, what do you think about your personal experiences or whatever. That's not the point of this conversation, and you don't have to let your ego
Right.
get in the way. you know. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And I think atheists listening to you are going to, it's like some of the stuff you said was catnip, I'm sure, because some of the things you said were like, they're going to be amening, especially the people who started out as Christians and became atheists, you
Sure.
know.
But
But
yeah, now
okay,
I mean now
so on,
you understand my content. Is the whole thing is I'm saying some things that they'll say amen to, but then also saying things that they'll be, uh, you know,
yeah,
what is
so,
it?
so you're bringing them in with catnip, with atheist catnip. You go, this is why Girl Gone Wild. What's the one that you keep dissing? Girls Gone Wild or something, or girl to
Girl defined.
Girl Defined.
Pretty
It's
much
like
the
this is
opposite
why
of
Girl
Girls Gone
Defined.
Wild.
Yeah, Girls Gone really sedate and asexual. It's the exact opposite. Girls Gone asexual, and totally Christianed out. Girls Defined. Here's why Girl Defined are so lame and queer. So all the atheists click on it. It's like catnip, and then you're like, by the way, you need to have better arguments when you're talking to Christians like Craig. And they're like, wait,
Yep.
what's this? Where's
Yep.
this part come from? I clicked on this
Exactly.
to have Christian bashing. Bring back the Christian bash. But you're kind of riding that line pretty well, because Girl Defined, I think, is as far as I can tell, that's catnip. That's like
Yeah.
that's up there with, like, you know most atheists are going to click on that just seeing it, knowing you're going to say something, you know,
Right.
mocking
They
them.
click on it because it's catnip, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he's gonna take down Girl Defined." And at the end of the video, it says, "Hey, go become religiously literate on the foundations of Christianity and Islam, so that you can be more respectful to people in these conversations." And they're like, "Ah, damn it!"
Yeah,
You
it's
know?
like what is that bull crap? It's like, here, eat your vegetables too.
But that's one of the
Exactly.
reasons why I get the amount of support that I get now, rather than it just people just seeing me as a regular atheist channel like anybody else. I get more dedicated followers than a lot of other atheists, maybe the same size, because certain people have realized that stuff and been like, you know what, we can draw people in this certain way, but we need to have higher level conversations, and they know that that's what I'm trying to do. So hopefully more people will do
Amen.
that
And
and
it's like
be
it's like
respectful.
when I first heard Shannon put out a video before I knew her, and I put out a video like, what she says her goal is. I'm totally on board with. It
Yeah.
was basically to elevate the conversation and have better, more honest conversations with people who disagree with you. And I was
Yep.
like, I 150% support that. Yes, she's an evil atheist, but that's a worthy goal.
Yep. And I support anybody that wants to do that, and you have a bit of that, and so that's why I support you.
Cool. So get me some fresh meat. Get me some people you think that would be good. Some new victims. I mean, guests from my channel. Get me. If you can get Dan, I'll have him and Rachel, and then anyone else you think that would be good. You kind of understand almost exactly what I'm trying to do. You've experienced it. So
Well,
anyone
it's
you think
it's a
that this would be
deal
good
as
for.
long as you'll go ahead and keep trying to call into Dan's show, especially when it's live.
Yeah, what's with this? What's with the freaky never connecting? I'm always home at that time too. And I was like Friday night, and I've put it in my mind like 3 weeks in a row. Okay, make sure that the phone is charged at around 5 or 6 o'clock, and then I just space out. And the time I look at the phone and I see there's a message from you, I'm like, wait a minute, it's over. Like last Friday it was over. I had in my mind I was going to check, and I still blew it. So
Well, no worries. I want someone to come on that's a nice and reasonable Christian to talk to so that we can really set precedent on the show of, hey, this is how we talk to nice people. Like and the person that we're talking to right now exemplifies our values of talking to people constructively and respectfully, even though they have different ideas than us. So yeah, as long as you'll call in, then I'll do my best to get Dan and Rachel for you. I'm guessing they jump at the opportunity because they're both great. I
cool.
mean, like I told you, so
Awesome, because I watched they're doing Bible studies now on like
yeah,
I guess Rachel's channel or something. I watched some of that.
yep.
So cool. All right, Drew. So we'll wrap it up. This went really quick again. I mean, we can do this for a couple more hours, but it's been two actually. And when in like a week or two, maybe 2 weeks, you come back on. We'll do the same thing or do different things, whatever you feel like talking about.
Well, I had a ton of fun, and I look forward to talking to you next time, whenever that is. Hopefully, it's not too long.
Yeah, no, it should be in like 2 weeks. You watched the Godless Cranium show. That's good. That's good.
Yep.
I thought that went well. I like that guy.
Yeah, he's
So,
pretty
all
great.
right, we will wrap it up, kids. If is anybody listening? Is there even an audience at this point?
It's
I
probably a
can't.
couple. We probably yammered on for too long, but there's some.
Well, people watch it. A decent amount of people watch the Godless Cranium show. So,
Yeah.
um, we are wrapping it up. If you are still with us, yes, we went on too long, but we needed to learn a lot about Mr. Drew here and his channel. If you want to tell him where to find you.
I am Genetically Modified Skeptic, so you can search Genetically Modified Skeptic on YouTube, and I will be there. And I'm also GM Skeptic on Facebook and GM_Skeptic on Twitter. I am the most active on Twitter. I mean, like Craig, and so you can search me out there, find me there. And yeah, thanks for having
Yes,
me on.
tweet him. Yeah, man, this was awesome. This was absolutely awesome. This was exactly how I wanted it to happen.
Yep.
So 2 weeks or so, we'll do it again.
All right.
Get me
Well,
some
thanks for
fresh,
having
from
me.
fresh, some fresh kills, some fresh meat for the grinder.
Well, I'll get on
Some
that, getting that for you.
cool, man. Thank you, Drew, and we will say goodbye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.